Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. Um, so I didn't get to all the video clips I was going to get to yesterday, and I just did a very long hour and a half voiceover that's going to my Journey series and other places, but it's about change in consciousness, which, to survive what's about to happen, and there is some sort of evolutionary movement in the human species, there needs to be a change in consciousness. And I talk about this a lot through you know, um, the meditative practice that I've been doing and some things that happen. When I was meditating last night, I was watching this show called The Leftovers. And there's these people in the show, and I get to this later on in the video, that knew that this big event, this sort of this event where people disappeared via in the book of Revelations, when the good people allegedly are going to be disappear from the earth, and the people who are left over. And this show is sort of about that. And there are people who are aware of what was going to happen, right? And so I talk about this extensively. I'm not going to really cover it here, but there needs to be a shift in consciousness. And I'll be talking about this a lot in the future. That there are people who are sort of waking up and aware to the changes that are going on, and then there's the NPC people who are incapable of dealing with what's about to happen and what's already happening, right? But I was talking about how these people, these media people and these other people, are on the cusp of realizing we're effed. That was what I was talking about in my last video. So I want to continue finishing up that video here. Let's start with these guys again.
2 months ago, had this screening of Ronald Reagan. And I went for the movie. And they should have another screening. And they should play Ronald Reagan on tariffs. And Ronald Reagan will say, it seems like the patriotic thing to do. But those people in Congress, they're just bowing to special interests. And tariffs always raise rates. They cause inflation. They hurt competitiveness. They hurt innovation.
Ronald Reagan was a fucking actor who went senile. So really not somebody... He was a complete actor, right? He was a legitimate actor of B movies, really bad actor, who made it into politics because he could read a script. And he came in, when I was a kid. And he was, so obviously not a genuine person. Like, he was just, handed these scripts. His wife was kind of his handler in some ways. And then he had Alzheimer's, which his son admits to now, during his second term. And he was like a Joe Biden. And so to say that Ronald Reagan had an opinion on things, the opinion he had was what his handlers gave him. He wasn't a political figure. He was good at, reading scripts that appealed to right-wing people, and had some good luck with the Russia collapsing and things like this to make it sound like he was a good president. But, he was just a straight-up actor, right?
And it's a false patriotism. Don't fall for it. And they should just watch that over and over and over again.
This seems pretty straightforward if you're a conservative. What also makes this, I think, somewhat absurd is they put out this formula here.
This guy, this dandy man here.
I have it here.
He's a Republican.
It's a chart like this that the president held up. And in the blue and white column, they basically had a made-up formula. Here's how Larry Summers describes it. It's now clear that Donald Trump's administration computed reciprocal tariffs without using tariff data. No tariff data at all. This is to economics what creationism is to biology, astrology is to astronomy, or RFK thought is to vaccine science.
Yeah, so that's not a good analogy, douchebag, right? If you want to talk to sheeple, yeah, sure. Use that analogy, but you lose people when you bring shit like that in. Like saying what RFK Jr. says is ridiculous. We know, again, not that RFK Jr. is good or a truther, but he, says things that we agree with about vaccines and other things, right? And so, he's not, when you listen to Pfizer, sure. So that makes it sound like Trump is a truther in terms of his position on tariffs, and that's not anywhere close to the truth, right? the thing with the tariffs are, that if they were to work, or if they had the potential of working, there's a shelf life of 4 years to Trump's economic policies. Because in 4 years, the Democrats are going to seize power and go back to the way things were. Like Trump's tariffs, in terms of building manufacturing back in America, it would take years to do. Like the companies aren't just going to start coming back to America now, right? And when they do come back, the prices for the goods and services that they manufacture here is going to be passed on to the American people. The reason that, you see this on Shark Tank, the sharks always encourage people to manufacture in China because it reduces costs, labor costs, and production costs, and so they can get more of a margin and charge less money. That's why you manufacture in foreign countries, because it's cheaper to do so. And so if tariffs worked and manufacturing came back to America, the goods and services would still be passed on to the American people. The price hike. And, other price hikes too. And so either way, prices are going up and people can't handle that shit. They wouldn't vote for that. And so people are looking for short-term results with Trump, and that's what Trump has always been about, even if it's been bullshit policies. But, they're not going to be there. So these things, even if there was some merit to what he was doing, it's a long-term project that he's not going to be around for, even if he served another 4 years, or he didn't allow for election. He's not going to be around long enough, and there's going to be mass rioting. People are going to turn on him, including other Republicans, when his popularity dips from price increases. Like, there's going to be results to the tariffs. Already the economy is imploding, and there's going to be some results. People are going to start seeing results. And the Democrats and the media are going to blame every economic disaster from here on out on these tariff policies, whether they were good or bad or indifferent. So they have no chance of succeeding, right? Even if it was a good thing, which it's not, because it's obvious what tariffs do. It raises prices. They have to raise prices. Whatever effects the tariffs would have, that's the only thing that's going to matter, right? But this clown, bringing in RFK Jr. and vaccines, it's just like, and her reading this is why you don't have any viewers, because nobody believes in the official story anymore, right? Even sheeple are questioning the official story.
The Trump tariff policy makes little sense, even if you believe in protectionist, mercantilist economics. I don't understand. I mean, I guess they think nobody is going to bother to check, but making up numbers and then saying, we're going to half that number and be generous is not math. It's also not economics. It's kind of no way to run the economics of the greatest economy in the world.
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the mathematical formulas they came up with because I wasn't there and I don't know how or why they did it. I have mixed feelings about this, truthfully. I wasn't trained to believe in tariffs. Those of us who grew up as traditional Republicans have always thought what Ronald Reagan thought. And so what Trump is doing here
is a Ronald Reagan guy.
Implanting new economic theory DNA inside of the Republican Party. And what you're seeing is some Republicans are rejecting it. Some Republicans are reluctantly going on with it. Some Republicans are enthusiastically embracing it. I know people in the business community who are on both sides of it, frankly, back home in Kentucky and elsewhere. I'm also persuaded, frankly, by the Trump argument regarding the working class in this country and also by the fairness argument. So I will just...
There's no such thing as fairness. If fairness, okay, it's fair. This is, the results are what matters, right?
Say this, if it works, it'll be the ballsiest and gutsiest thing a president's done in decades. Let me finish. Let me finish. And if it doesn't work, the political consequences fall on the shoulders of one man.
Actually, and I totally agree with you. This is the one time I actually agree with you. Jim Cramer said it best. Well, there are several, maybe 5 times. This is one of those 5 times. Jim Cramer.
Occidental, how do you pronounce that? It's obviously in Josa, she's Hispanic.
Kramer said this is a man-made issue. One man made this issue, and it was Donald Trump. And I think that the Americans wanted lower prices. They didn't want higher prices. What's going to happen, and what economists are saying, is not only are people going to get laid off, But costs are going to go up, and that's not what the American people want, and they're going to see it in the midterm elections. And so I think that the Republican Party needs to be very careful about what they're doing. The other problem with all of this is the uncertainty. He's not saying how long these tariffs are going to go. He's not saying, is this a done deal for a while, or is it a short-term deal? And that's a problem for business.
Let me let Richard in.
You talked about the political consequences will be on the shoulders of one man, but the economic consequences are going to be on the whole world. This is...
He's is this guy really British? He's like some kind of character, right? Out of some old British, like, Mary Poppins or something.
is an experiment that should not have been taking place. Because, and you talk about the Republicans who are not speaking up. So far, I mean, Mitch McConnell has come out with a statement. Where was he talking about this, by the way, during the campaign, when we knew that tariffs were going to be large on the agenda? You also
you just raised an issue. You said during the campaign, when we knew, because Donald Trump
no one
talked
ever
about
expected this madness.
They expected Donald Trump to enact tariffs. He did it in his first term.
Let's be fair.
I do think there was
This
an
is
expectation.
economic vandalism.
I mean, this is actually not.
Well, I would think a lot of
Hold on a
working-class
second.
Americans would say what was done to
Scott,
them was economic
Right.
crunch.
This is-
But the jobs that are going to come back, according to the Peterson...
Okay, so the big deal here is that guy, Scott Jennings, who has defended Trump every time I've seen him, and he's very pro-Republican, admitting that this thing's either going to work or not, and if it doesn't work, Trump's fucked. I mean, like, Trump's going to look like the bonehead, and he is a bonehead. Like, they warned him about this, and I don't know what, whether he was ordered to go through with it, or he's just too stubborn, or whatever. But the powers that be didn't stop him. The Wall Street people that are his handlers, the banksters, Israel, he's got handlers. And they didn't stop Trump. And to me, that means that they are fully embracing the idea of America collapse, an American collapse. And so, this is whatever. The tariffs are going to go one way or another. We'll see. Let's move forward here. Okay, so I want to cover this whole trailer. It's called G20. It's from Amazon Prime. Some movie making companies or TV show, whatever, production company studios allow you to cover the whole trailer, and that's smart. And then the moronic ones like Netflix copyright you and don't let you show the whole trailer, which you're putting out the trailer because you want fucking people to see it, right? And their policies are stupid. I would make a video on trailers like all the time because there's always stuff in it that's hilarious or that needs to be talked about. But this is, we'll see what the Amazon Prime does. I'm not sure what their policies are. But I want to, cover at least some of this.
Madam President, we have a situation. Ma'am, apprehension is minutes away.
Okay, so this actress here, and I'll remember her name in a moment. I just took a little bit of nap. I was so tired. I've been wiped out. But she was famously known for this. Here, she is. We don't have the balls to pull this off, lady. Here is the clip.
Because no one thinks we have the balls to pull this off.
So that movie is probably around 10 years old, called Widows. And that hilarious line. And what that's about, her husband was Liam Neeson, and he was a bank robber. And she died, along with his two, cohorts. And she and two other women are being pressed by gangsters or somebody to come up with money their husbands owe the gang or the mafia, something like that. I kind of watched the movie as a joke after seeing this trailer. And so they're trying to become bank robbers with the only experience they have is their husbands were criminals. And that's where she says, they don't think we have the balls to pull this off. And you literally don't have the balls to pull it off, right? I know at the end, Liam Neeson comes back, and I think she kills him. He faked his own death and tries to take the money from her. Some shit, I don't remember. But from that point, she was considered a badass. She was also, there was a movie I think called The Woman King or something like that. It was some African tribe where the men wouldn't fight back, so the women became warriors and fought back. And she's, a year younger than me. She's 59. And she now is considered an action hero. And so, they put her out there. She just doesn't have the energy or the face for it, right? Like she's like a Clint Eastwood type, where they're trying to cast her as being kick-ass. So she wakes up and she's president, like she has this crisis.
A little much, don't you think, Mom?
Zip it. You and your brother are coming to Cape Town with us.
Why?
You know why.
All you ever care about is work.
I implore all world leaders to join me at the G20 summit.
She's going to the G20 summit.
Come on, Madam President.
Oh, damn.
In South Africa.
Now I gotta go save the world.
She's going to save the world with her presidential.
The 20 most powerful world leaders together. Going dark in 3.
So the bad guys are the ones who are taking down the G20 leaders. The bad guys are taking down these corrupt world leaders at the G20.
2.
In South Africa. The bad South Africans.
1.
That guy is here. He is whatever that superhero show that's on Amazon that they're called The Boys. He's whatever his name is, forget, I don't know. He's the bad guy in the show. He plays like an evil version of Superman. Boom! She's showing her action hero stuff.
To the governments watching, I've taken the G20 by force.
Boom! Somebody finally did.
When we launch Project Deepfake, we will reset the world's financial markets.
Boom! Why launch Project Deepfake?
You gotta read the words exactly as written.
Quick beige fox. Quick beige fox. Quick beige fox.
Now we control the narrative.
Boom! They control the narrative, and they're the villains because they're taking the world's economy down and the people with it.
My husband and kids are missing. We have
Boom! So what are you gonna do about it?
to find them. If you want to live, you'll follow my lead.
Now
Boom! She's taking control.
you're Captain America.
Boom! Look at her go. She's an action hero. She's taking out guys with guns in her high heels. She's not only a president. There's a great comedy bit Louis C.K. does about the Good Will Hunting movie and how they wrote themselves these parts. Matt Damon wrote himself this part in which he's a guy who loves to fight. He's just a fighter. He's the fightiest guy ever. He loves to fight. But he's also the world's smartest guy, right? And he gets into the thing, like he does a whole bit about how that scene where he says, do you like apples? And the guy goes, yes. And he goes, how do you like that? I got her number. I got a number. How do you like them apples? And, he talks about how, what if the guy said, no, I don't like apples, right? Because the guy won't say that because, it's an obvious question that the obvious antagonist is coming up and saying, do you like apples? And you could ignore the question altogether or say no, which you would. But he says yes, and the guy is able to deliver the line, right? It's because the scripts are written this way. But here's this 59-year-old woman who's been in a lot of bad movies where she plays some sort of action hero. And, does not look like an athlete and certainly not able to kick one guy's ass. But she's beating up 2 armed, trained military personnel.
That was quite well done.
They've got at least 5 hostages in the kitchen.
Your survival is what matters most.
I will not leave them.
Drop it!
Look at this guy's some huge guys. He's burning his
President
face.
Danielle Sutton. You get around, don't you?
I'll get around to you too.
Boom! I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. Homelander. That's the guy's name. She's coming for Homelander.
Mom, I can help.
Lights out.
Boom! The daughter's getting in there too. She's a technical genius.
Find her.
Where are my husband and kids?
We're all here together.
I'm gonna get you out of here.
Her husband's that comedian. Boom. G20, because it would be such a tragedy if the G20 leaders were all kidnapped and the narrative was hijacked.
What if we get you into a comfortable pair of heels, hmm? Do you want an honest answer?
Boom. Boom. April 10th, it's coming. Okay, so Russell Brand, who was another fake truther out there, who's, I guess, a Trump MAGA person, posted this on social media today.
Hello. Firstly, thank you for these incredible and overwhelming messages of support.
Well, what do you need support for, bro? What's going on?
We're very fortunate, in a way, to live in a time where there's so little trust in the British government. We're very
Boom, exactly. The fucking British government. I mean, nobody trusts those motherfuckers anymore.
fortunate, I suppose, that this is happening at a time where we know that the law has become a kind of weapon.
Exactly. Those guys use it as a fucking weapon.
To be used against people, institutions, and sometimes entire nations.
And comedians and shit like that, right? I bet like they're using the law against you right now. Is that what's going on? Nice hat, though. On vacation, wearing the straw hat.
That will not accept and tolerate levels of corruption that are unprecedented. I'm speaking particularly to those of you that are watching this in the UK. How do you feel about your legal system right now? How do you...
I bet they feel like shit. I bet it sucks.
You feel about some of the high-profile cases that are not being pursued and prosecuted? How do you feel that the Southport murders were handled? How do you...
I don't know anything about the Southport murders, but now I'm questioning the level of police involvement in those cases that aren't being prosecuted.
How do you feel about the government of Keir Starmer? Now, that's just sort of general context. Me, I've always told you guys that when I was young and single, before I had my wife and family, were just out of shot over there, my beautiful children.
I bet they're not even there, bro. You're bullshitting us. You don't even have a wife and children.
I was a fool, man.
You were a fool. I agree with you, bro. You were a fucking fool.
I was a fool before I lived in the light of the Lord.
But when you found the Lord, just like Pete Hegseth, you put all that shit aside. Good for you, bro. Way to change. You were a fool at first, found the Lord, and now you're better off.
I was a drug addict, a sex addict, and an imbecile. But why?
It's a imbecile. You were all three of those things. I get it. A drug addict, a imbecile. I think the majority of us agree with those that characterization of how it used to be.
And an imbecile. But what I never was a rapist.
Wait, what? Holy shit, where'd that come from, bro? What happened to you? What's going on in your life right now, bro?
Man, I was a fool before I lived in the light of the Lord. I was a drug addict, a sex addict, and an imbecile. But what I never was a rapist. I've never engaged in non-consensual activity. I pray that you can see that by looking...
I pray that you can see that.
...in my eyes.
Look at his eyes. Go back.
I pray that you can see that by looking in my eyes.
Look into his eyes. You can tell right now. Look into those fucking eyes. He's telling you what's up. Those are not the eyes of a rapist right there. Apparently, there's some bad shit going on in Russell Brand's orbit that he's blaming on government targeting of him because he's now some kind of a right-wing truther.
I want to thank all of you for your continuing support. I want to let you know that our show will be on Rumble on Monday. Thanks for your support.
Get ready to rumble.
There. And, of course, I'm now going to have the opportunity to defend these charges in court, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
He's grateful for that.
In the meantime, you lot, stay free, and we will be continuing to discuss this matter.
Boom. Let's, I don't think this was the best legal move on your part because, that was weird. I mean, I don't know whether you're guilty or not. I don't think you probably are. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know anything about this. It's all news to me. I know that he's been a piece of shit Trump supporter. That's, one of these fake truthers that pretends to be like a truth person, but then is, supports these right-wing bullshit things. But anyways, that was just fucking weird. So let's watch this. I'll turn the volume down. So this is from Boston Dynamics. Now, this is an MIT company. And they're always posting new videos of their robots. And the robot is much more sophisticated than the ones they've had in the past, right? And these things can do more and more things, right? But this one looks more human-esque and is able to, in terms of its movements and these other things, is able to do a lot more. And so they're evolving quickly in what they can produce as robots, right? Now, this is as significant development as anything else because I said before, they're going to get to a part where robots, see that, this is just all new shit, right? That robots can fucking breakdance and that robots will be able to replace people as laborers. Because, when that happens here, when robots replace people, and once they get robots can fix other robots, people become obsolete in so many different levels. Robots doing the work of miners or, doing the work of mechanics or any kind of number of jobs, manual labor type jobs. And then the majority of the people would no longer be necessary, right? Robots can harvest food, robots can plant food, robots can cook meals, all these things. You get rid of, and then AI technology with the software that can be placed into robots, to the extent that robots can do pretty much every job, 90% of the jobs that need to be done. And then the majority of humanity just become worthless people that are, what's the value to the people that control the planet? Robots can fight wars and shit like that, right? And so you don't need soldiers, and they're better than this. And robots don't have rights. They don't have, unless the AI technology. Then we've seen the science fiction movies on this stuff. But we're kind of getting to that place where robot technology is taking over more and more work. We know this with AI. We know this with manufacturing, and there's going to be a point where people are like obsolete in terms of the necessity to keep society going. And so then there could be massive population reduction. The people who are, who not valued, the people that are called useless eaters by the so-called elite, the controllers. And so we're getting close to that time now. Here's another video. Now this looks a little bit like AI, but they have these drone taxis now in China. That they're going to start bringing out, like they're developing these things, where people are going to be moved back and forth. Of course, we know this with Amazon. They want to use drones to deliver your shit to your house, and where there'll be just drones everywhere. And drone development, another aspect of something that could drastically change the world. Here they are getting in one of these taxis here. That looks like maybe a real video there or whatever, but that one part was whatever. So these two things were sent to me like on the same day. But these technological developments, there's, I turn the volume down, I wonder if there's anything here. Yeah, it's just shitty music. So, you'll be in here and somebody will be flying you around. You'll have no control over this thing. So the drone taxis. Ursula von der Leyen warns of the impact of Trump's tariffs. The president of the European Commission warns citizens that this increase in the price of tariffs in the United States will affect consumers and businesses.
It will be felt immediately. Millions of citizens will face higher grocery bills. Medication will cost more, as well as transportation. Inflation will go up. And this is hurting in particular the most vulnerable citizens. All businesses, big and small, will suffer from day one. From greater uncertainty to the disruption of supply chains, to burdensome bureaucracy, the costs of doing business with the United States will drastically increase. And what is more, there seems to be no order in the disorder. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us. The tariffs will also hurt consumers around the world. It will be felt.
So this is going to go in whatever way it's going to go, right? And the bigger picture here is if this is going to cause really drastic, disastrous ramifications to the American consumer, global consumers, this isn't done. Trump can't just do shit on his own, right? They have killed presidents before. Anybody who would disrupt the world economy this much, they'd be taken out. Remember Trump? I mean, they had that fake assassination attempt. Why not now? Why wouldn't they take the guy out now, right? And so Trump has always been a puppet and, handled, and he's, always been an upward mover and always wanted the blessings of the powers that be. And he likes to hobnob with billionaires. Like he's got Elon Musk. He's got some of the richest men in the world, these tech giants, that are now his supporters and backing him, right? And these are all greedy motherfuckers, right? These are all hoarders of money. If you're a billionaire, you're a hoarder of money. Millionaire, sure. There's got to be some rich people. There's going to be some spectrum of wealth. But billionaires and multi-billionaires, I mean, you don't need that much money, and you're never going to spend a fraction of the money that you're hoarding, and they still want more, right? I mean, they want more and more of this money because it means more and more global power, and they like to rig things even more for themselves, and Trump's a part of that club. And so the issue really is, why is he getting away with doing this? It's because they want this to be done. They want chaos, right? She's talking about chaos here, and he's destabilizing the country. And so this is part of that chaos. They're bringing in the chaos, right? That's, it's the bigger picture is, why is he being allowed to do this, right? Like anybody knows that there's people above the president. There's people who are above these world leaders, and they dictate what these guys can and cannot do. And either they're ordering him to do this, or he's just doing this on his own volition. But either way, they're psyched about it. They're happy about it. This is what they want. Okay, so here's another trailer. It's a 1-minute trailer. Again, either they're going to copyright me or they're not. If they copyright me, I'm taking the whole clip out so you won't see this at all. I'm not going to go back and edit little bits of it because, fuck them, right?
Multiple SWAT units responding to hostage situation.
Hey, little girl, stop.
Stop, little girl.
What do you want, little one? Your ass.
That's the sound of the police. That's the sound of the beast.
Seth MacFarlane. Okay,
Who are you?
Frank Drebin, Police Squad. The new version.
Okay, this is just weird and creepy. So there's a movie called Naked Gun, starring this actor Leslie Nielsen, who was in these two movies, Airplane and Naked Gun, and he was never considered a comedic actor, kind of like Liam Neeson. But Airplane, there were these spoof movies, and he played himself, played like what he would play in a normal movie or TV show. But those lines were now comedic instead of, they're very similar lines he would deliver, right? And then they made Naked Gun 2.5, which is a sequel. O.J. Simpson was involved in Airplane and maybe the other movies as well. I think he was involved in both movies. I think he played his partner, Leslie Nielsen's partner. Here they have Leslie Nielsen here.
That's the sound of the police.
Hi, Daddy. It's me, Frank Jr.
And so this is god awful. And then him wearing that dress, and it's like almost like a humiliation ritual.
Love you. Hey, Dad. Boy, do I miss you.
Sound of the police.
So that's the joke, because O.J. Simpson starred in this movies. They shit on everybody but O.J. They shit on O.J. and embracing everybody else. you know, they've remade all these things. They're remaking more and more shit. You know, I watched this movie called Wolves on Apple TV with Brad Pitt and whatever that fucking guy's name is, the political guy, George Clooney. And what they do is they play two guys who are fixers that are there to clean up a dead body. And they both have this line that nobody can do what I do. And they're both they're like the same guy. And they have to work together. They've never heard of each other. And they're competitive. And it turns out that they know all the people they work with normally, including their boss, as the movie unfolds. They work with the same people, and yet they've never heard of each other. They do the exact same job. They have the exact same boss, and they work with all the exact same people, and they've never even been suspicious. And none of these other people said, "Hey, there's another guy just like you." They wear the same clothes, and they're always trying to one up each other. In this, like, you know, this banter that they're doing, right? And they're both like, I got a guy. The guy it's always the same guy. I got a guy. My guy's better than your guy, right? And they got these stupid jokes. They're both not funny people. And it's like, you know, it's high production values, but horrible movie. Because they both made a similar movie. You know, Brad Pitt made a movie that was allegedly the reason he left Jennifer Aniston for Angelina Jolie, called, was it The Joneses or something like that, or Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And they're both hitmen, and they don't know that the other person's a hitman. And, you know, and then they get competitive because they've been hired to kill each other. And it's a whole thing, right? And, you know, they, I think they're married at the beginning of the movie, and they didn't know each other was a hitman. It's like stupid shit. And then George Clooney did a movie with some Cruel Intentions or something like that, or Cruel something. And don't tell me, don't care, I don't need to know. But he's a lawyer, and whatever that woman, that English woman who's married to Michael Douglas, whatever her name is, Catherine Zeta-Jones. And they're both lawyers, and they go after each other. There's a whole thing. In a very way that they're trying to compete. It's the same kind of, they've done these, there are just so many movies that are just the same redundant bullshit, if not remakes. They've run out of shit, right? And it's just like contrived shit that they're putting out. You know, just rewriting some other piece of crap that was made years ago with the same plot, storylines, and, you know, everything. I don't know what this is. Defense for Children in Palestine. 17-year-old Palestinian child prisoner starved to death by Israeli prison guards. Gets into how dehydration from colitis, you know, he was abused and all these things. You know, you hear all these things about Israeli hostages, but never the Palestinian ones. They're being treated great, you know. Like these guys, you know, the Israelis are hostages, but the civilians who have been taken by Israel, the many civilians are somehow they're prisoners of war. They're not hostages or not, you know, the whole thing. I don't know. I think my wife somebody sent me this, but just want to point this ongoing, you know, bullshit about this, you know, this genocide that's happening. So this is a Twitter post, and it says a bunch of chickens organize an illegal dog fight. And it's a couple of puppies going at it. And the chickens in their chicken's feed bowl or something. Chickens are watching them. You know, because the cockfight's kind of a brilliant idea here. I mean, I don't even know how the puppies got in there. Unless they put the puppies in and raise them with chickens to protect the flock. You know, they do that with goats and Great Pyrenees. I mean, anyways, you get the idea. So somebody sent me this. My wife had sent me one. I don't know if she sent me this one or somebody else did. Here's this former Amish woman who makes videos, and she thinks she has to stare at the camera like it's some kind of...
A couple of days ago, I sent my husband to Walmart to get some whipping cream because I wanted to make something with whipping cream. And he came back with half a gallon of heavy whipping cream. So today we're going to make some butter. Now, when I was growing up, we never bought butter, so we always had to make it ourselves. But we did not use a KitchenAid stand mixer to do it. We always used a hand crank butter churn. Let's get this thing started and see how long it takes. It's currently at 12:30. I'll show you the time again once it's done. This is starting to separate now. I'm gonna take it up and we're gonna scrape the sides down. And if you don't have a cover for your KitchenAid, which I don't, you might want to cover it with a top because this is going to splatter around a lot in the beginning when you start whisking it. This is how it looks. It's all stiff already. And I'm assuming if you follow me, you probably know how butter is made. But just in case you don't, just take cream, whip it up. It goes into whipped cream and then it separates and you get buttermilk and butter. And then you take the butter out of the buttermilk, which we're doing right now. So
It's hilarious the way she stares at the camera. Anyways, apparently she's got a whole host of videos and has a pretty big following. Okay, so one of my viewers sent me this. I didn't even understand what it was at first. Vaccination in progress. So these chicks are being picked up by their heads. How fucked up is that? And so, you know, they're getting fucking their mRNA, whatever they're getting there. So here's a video clip somebody sent me that says, this hasn't aged well. This is Theo Vaughn with Tucker Carlson. And, you know, Tucker's the piece of shit, Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson, and lots of people say that he worked for the CIA, you know, in the truth community. I haven't looked into any of that shit because I don't give a fuck. I know he's like a fucking tool and a stooge, right? So Tucker Carlson was obnoxious piece of shit that worked for Fox News. And then he started to embrace truther narratives. You know, and I called him out for, you know, there was this old video clip. There was this guy, Adam versus the man who, you know, saw Tucker Carlson. This is probably 10, 15 years ago. And asked him about 9/11. And Tucker Carlson said, come on. Let's just, come on. And I called him out. I showed that clip. And I don't know if other people did it, or I don't know how it got back to him, or if it had anything to do with that. But he apologized for doing that. Like, he knew that clip was out there. And he said now that he was open to believing the so-called conspiracy theories about that. And I said, you know, that's, I mean, regardless of, you know, that's growth or movement, right? But then he embraced Trump. And Trump is a piece of shit. And this fake assassination attempt, you know, Trump cheated on all his wives and has all these character flaws. And he shows how narcissistic and he's a weak guy. Trump is weak. He's just not a good leader. He's a fucking grifter. He speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He promises things to both sides. I mean, he's all over the place in what he says. And he's not, you know, a good person. Like, everybody around him knows what a piece of shit he is, and you don't have to be around him to know that. And Tucker Carlson used to hate the guy. But now Trump can do no wrong. In fact, there was a video that came out, and I started watching it, and I was like, I don't feel like I can't get through this. It's Trump's Treasury Secretary that he's interviewing and letting the guy tell his audience how great the tariffs are. And so Tucker Carlson's covering for Trump in this debacle of the terrorists, right? And, you know, it's not just the terrorists, it's his position on Israel, it's his, you know, all the shit that he's doing, right? Trying to make Canada into a state and own Greenland. He's all over the fucking place doing stupid Trump shit. And all these people who were, you know, supposed truthers should bail on Trump because they know, like Tucker Carlson knows. But whatever his handlers are saying, whatever reason he's still vouching for Trump, he's just a worthless piece of shit that, you know, flirted with the truth community, pretended to become a truther, and established even a bigger following. And he's making more money now than when he was at Fox, you know, and you get the rest of it.
You know, you feel vulnerable and, like, you know, you're not allowed to say certain things. And I do think I was never censored, but I self-censored for sure. You know, the war in Iraq breaks out and you're like, maybe it's a good idea. But it's not a good idea.
Yeah, like tariffs aren't a good idea either, bro. You're self-censoring now. So he's already admitting here, and this video clip's been sitting up for a while. The video clip of Tucker Carlson interviewing Trump's Treasury Secretary today and letting the guy, spin this whole disaster. And Tucker Carlson, I didn't watch the video, so Tucker Carlson might ask him some tough questions, but he's still giving guy a platform, and he didn't sound like he was against the tariffs. And so, maybe he is, I don't know, like I'm not watching the guy, but he's allowing Trump to do a lot of shit that Trump shouldn't do. Like if Tucker Carlson bailed on him, that would be a major blow, right? Like somebody who was that much of a supporter of his. It wouldn't affect the Trumpers because they're brain dead fucking zombies who are, marked for extinction, right? Because just like the liberals are, people who actually believe in all this bullshit, right? They have no chance. Anyways.
And it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But you allow yourself to be convinced because it's super unpopular to say it's not a good idea, but it clearly wasn't. War with Iran, not a good idea. I can say that now.
Yeah.
And if something's really stupid, like let's go have a war with Iran. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And I just feel like it's, maybe because of my age and my job, I have a moral obligation to say, I think that's really unwise.
You mean what Trump wants to do? Trump wants war with Iran.
You don't want to go to war with Iran.
No. I'm not. That's insane.
Oh yeah, look, I'm not saying it is either. I don't think that we should be involved in a lot of this shit.
You think? How's it helping? Is it helping you a lot?
No, it's just causing
all these moral victories you're winning.
Right, but do you think? And I think when I was a child, it felt like that we were all It felt like we were united, that we were all like Americans.
Yes.
But it doesn't. I feel like that's been pretty heavily compromised, pretty quickly even, which is almost amazing. And I feel like, and these aren't Debbie Downer feelings; these are just thoughts. I should say that.
Okay, so what's happened here, since I've been a kid, I'm older than this guy, is we had 3 networks, and they really kept the bandwidth narrow, and journalists were actually journalists, and there was some truth to power. There was some level of holding corporations responsible, but all that shit got blown up with the internet, and now there's so many different opinions. There's so many different takes, and the people who run the government are no longer scared of the people. Like they know they have you. They know they have the mob. And they know as long as they're able to produce some levels of internet, especially with these young kids who, their heads are in the fucking, they spend more time in the internet than they do in the real world. They spend more time sleeping and on the internet than in the real world, 3-4 hours a day, right? All that shit. And so they know that the people won't rise up. And so, and even if they do, they know that doesn't matter because they can't sustain this lifestyle any longer. So those are the differences, right? But there has been significant differences where division is necessary for all the reasons that I've been saying here.
I think sometimes that, it's like America just feels like a shell company.
Yes.
That
people just park their assets.
We're just
here.
an LLC for
the world.
For a lot of
No,
and have we always been that?
Of course
though?
not. It was a real country. It wasn't just an idea or some shell company or LLC. But they're displacing a lot of that frustration onto regions, countries, conflicts that are thousands of miles away. It's almost like I'm picking a team and all my rage is going to... And I do wish people reserve their anger for our leaders who deserve it, in my opinion.
Okay, so Trump is doing that right now with the tariffs and all this bullshit in all these countries, right? Including the Gaza Strip and Denmark and Canada. Like, fuck, where are you speaking up about all this bullshit Trump's doing? Like, you say these things here. So this is why it said this doesn't age well.
Opinion on both sides. And for the problems that are like besetting the country, you drive through America recently, it's like not in good shape at all. It's kind of poor, actually, shockingly poor. And people should be really mad about that. And instead they're mad about whatever, Israel, Hamas. I mean, I get it. I think they're, I understand when people are upset on both sides. However, it's unhealthy to spend all your time in your head enraged about a foreign conflict when you're...
So somebody did a good job of fucking him over here. Because
the country is suffering so badly. Like, we need that energy, that constructive energy here. And I never hear anybody say, 108,000 people died of fentanyl ODs last year in my country.
Oh, yeah.
Like young people, a lot of whom weren't doing fentanyl. They were taking Percocet or benzos, and they ingested a pill with fentanyl in it, and they died. They were poisoned to death, okay? That's unbelievable. That's outrageous. No one's
outrageous.
Who's mad about that?
Yeah.
They're mad about some foreign war, and what a waste. You know, because we can't control that anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how the first things happen like that.
How are the pyramids built?
I don't know. People talk about it a lot.
People don't know.
We don't know.
How is
Okay. Again, you know, some of these things are legitimate questions, but, you know, you're a Trumper now. Like, Trumpers are the worst. Trumpers who claim to be truthers. You can't be both. Like, you can be a Trumper or you can be a truther, because Trump is the opposite of truth, right? Trump is a fucking pathological liar, somebody who believes his own bullshit, which is the worst kind of pathological liars. And he's, you know, worthless and a piece of shit, and he's a fraud, like he's a grifter. Like, he can't deliver on what he promises. He's a guy who's failed his whole life at the things that he says he's good at, and he, you know, he's failing now epically, and you are watching him do it, and you shouldn't have enough evidence to see what he's doing, and yet you're supporting him. You're like a sheeple on steroids if you're a Trumper, and Tucker Carlson, whatever he is an enabler to this, you know, this the nightmare of a situation that's going on. Okay, so I just want to say one more thing about this robot thing, and then, you know, tie this into my last video. Then I have a few videos of my chicks going after some worms, you know, to counteract the vaccine video. You know, what I say here really can't be monetized. So you can say that the world is ending and try to sell people gold or survival products and shit. So, you know, there's some monetization in the world ending. It's a market, right? But what I say here about connecting to the divinity within you, which is a free thing, you know, the Gratefullness meditation, Sajmarg meditation services are always free. And you know, just people connecting to God inside of them in some other way, right? Like focusing on connecting with their soul and praying for, you know, this connectivity, all these things. And so it's free. Like, it's fucking free, right? You know, it's something where, and that's to me the major thing that has to happen when I talk about a change of consciousness, which we're going to get to in the end of the video. But the thing that Tucker Carlson and all these fucks won't say, this is why I call them pieces of shit, is, you know, they can all sense that the thing's ending and that drastic measures are being taken. You know, I have a couple of videos that just got recommended to me. I was going to put them at the end here, but I'll start them off. It's Fareed Zakaria on the tariffs and this woman being interviewed by Jake Tapper, a Republican. And they're kind of epic. Like, I'm over the tariffs myself, because it's at the point where we're going to see the results, and the results are going to be there. But, you know, at some point, it's all going to backfire, and I'll cover that in my next video. Like, it has to, because, you know, we're not in a time where things are going to get better. Like, it just isn't. That isn't the season we're in right now, right? We're in a collapsing situation, and it all starts with how people have gotten worse and worse over generations and more unnatural, and it's divine will. And so, you know, if you're talking about this truthfully, you know, people have to change and prepare, which nobody wants to buy that shit. That's why it's not something that really can be monetized. It turns people off. When I say you have to change, the majority of people shut down because people don't want to change or give up more. And a lot of them can't. Like, a lot of people are just so assed out. You know, they're so broken. They're so bankrupt. They don't have anything left inside of them to do any kind of wholesale changes and to adapt to something new. They're just desperate, right? A lot of desperate people. And I'm not talking about just being, I'm talking about poverty. The dogs are barking. I have to yell at them in the door. You know, most people don't have any sort of a goal. Like, they're just living, you know, just automatons going through the motion. They've been beat, you know, no one's building them up, and everyone's tearing them down, and their relationship sucks, and they're just being drained. And then you get some like shitty little kids now who are fucking addicted to the internet, and you know, they don't think you know, understand you, don't speak the same language as you. They don't, like, you know, they have this whole different culture, and they're just kind of over the older people and disrespect us as much as they can. It's just this generation. I mean, every generation's like that, but it's even more of a division now. And so people just don't have any like joy in their life. They're doing whatever things they're addicted to, and that's it. There's no sense of self-transformation or having a purpose, and they're just wiped out. Like all their prana has been used up, walking around like zombies. And so you talk to people like that about change, they're like, fuck you, like I got nothing left, right? And like I can understand that, so that's just what it is. But that's what's being, that's for the time you live in, right? If you want to survive this thing, I mean, we're living in a transitional time. That there's, something's going to end and something else is going to begin, and there's no choice in it. There's no, this can be prolonged for whatever period of time, but it's like, you've been diagnosed with cancer and you're going to die of cancer. It's just a matter of when. But in all of that, you have these robots, and people represent two things: workers and an existing market, a global market that you can sell things to. And so, that's what the world population is. And it creates mad amount of wealth, crazy amounts of wealth that you can obtain by creating things that can be sold throughout the world, like cell phones. Like cell phones are, massive business, and that drives the technology. And so I've talked about this before, that when the technology is up to a certain level, you don't need the market anymore. You don't need this massive global market where people can make billions upon billions of dollars, companies can make trillions of dollars. And that gives them the resources that are necessary to, develop this technology. But it gets to a point where the technology is sufficient enough where you don't need the market anymore. Like the technology now can invent other technologies and develop technologies without all this massive amount of, debt-based currency and loans and shit like that, because you have robots that can build other, machines, and you have, software and things that can work things out quicker. And so it gets to a point where they don't need all the people to create this massive economic market, these potential customers. You don't need them all, because you now have robots, and you can replace, the cost of technology, and the technology becomes driven by its own, technology then creates technology without the high overhead that you had before. And then the other piece to this is you have people who do jobs that are now done by robots. So these are the two things. So this is when people become obsolete. And, the driving force behind it is the debt has gotten too crazy. And so they have to reboot the whole economic market. And they don't need to feed all these people. They don't need to, the pollution and all the stuff that's going on with the massive population and, too many useless eaters as they think about it, right? And so this is what I'm talking about with robots. It's, it's going to get to a point where it's going to make people as customers, the customer's always first. They're no longer going to need that kind of economy. They can change it into some other economy where you have, people who don't do shit for themselves, and they have technology do everything for them. And they can live in a world where they have all these nice places, and, you need very few people to do any, jobs. And when robots and software can do most of the jobs, then you can reduce the population significantly, and people can fly all over the world, the rich people living these utopian situation. But that's not going to happen. Like, it'll crap out before then. There's contingencies for all these things, and people aren't designed to live like that, where you have robot slaves and you don't do any primary labor. And people are thirsty to do things, like people want to grow food, and they want to learn these, like people are really into learning these skills. Like some part of them is being driven, this awareness, this consciousness that's waking up in people. And that's part of it, like wants to go back to some of the old ways, because they're, the whole, especially these kids who grow up and in these cyber worlds, and then they want real experiences. They want to have sensory experiences beyond the, beyond the cyber world. And so there's that. Okay, so let's go to the videos of the chicks eating the worms here. We got a little update video here. So you see the worms are in this thing here. Got this huge chunk of grass. Put it in here. My gloves under there. And there's a worm here for him that disappeared. Let's try this upside down a little bit. Okay. Here's a worm here. Well, that one got worm. It's got worm, but he lost it. It's right there. He found it again. That guy's haven't seen it yet. He's hit it. He's got it. He could just. That one's got a worm there. He's not chasing him. Like, there he goes. There you go. There you go. That one's got it. They changed beaks 3 times already. And there's other ones in here. So, okay, it's got it now. It's amazing how they call attention to themselves when they get it. He's trying to line up, but that guy saw it. He got it from above. That guy's got one too. He's got a grub or something. I don't know if it works. Anyways. You can see this now from the thing. It's good over here because they don't know you're watching them, so you can see, you can observe them more in their natural habitat without man-made natural habitat. Anyways, they pick away at these things. They find, roots and things in there. There's all kinds of good stuff in there. And then, see, that guy's got one there. Why did you turn around? You had it, bro. No one knew you had it. You turned around. Anyways. So I got a worm. I went out with a walk with my dogs in our pasture, and we have this thing here. See if one of these guys will come take it. There's okay, let's drop it. Boom. Alright, that guy's got it. It's a huge worm. Nightcrawler. So our pasture's flooded, so there's all that shit. There's some worms everywhere. Many of them are kind of drowned. You guys are fighting it out in the box there. Here it comes. It's got it. Look at him. He's trying to get in there. Look, he knows if he gets in there, he'll be isolated, but he couldn't make it in. So, guys, button was too fat to get him in there. There he goes. He's got it. Okay, look at the tug of war. There he goes. He got it down. He's gotten it down there. Boom. He almost got it out, trying to take it out of his mouth. Oh, he got it down. I spent a lot of time watching the chickens. Anyways, so I did this long voiceover, and it has to do with change in consciousness, and which is everything that I'm talking about here. It's more for my journey series and for my Gratefulness meditation channel stuff. But I felt like I should just put it in here. People can choose to listen to it or not. But here it is. Okay, so today's Sunday, April 6th. I took the 6th sitting. I'll take the 7th sitting tonight as an Abhyasi. And the 6th sitting was great. I mean, in terms of the energy, I didn't feel great. And it was late when I went to bed. And there were some situational issues. And so I felt the sitting was a really good sitting. But like I ate something I shouldn't have eaten. It was, like I said, it was later. And then my stomach was a little bit irritated. And sometimes when I eat stuff like late night, there's two things that could happen where I don't eat anything and I'm go to bed on an empty stomach, which is what I really want to do. And I don't sleep and I detox. My liver detoxes and I wake up and there's irritation and anger in my system, not at anything specific. But then there are times I eat something and it doesn't necessarily agree with me, and then I go to bed and I have the same effect. So that was happening. So where I was feeling really cleaned out the day before and as light as I could, and the sitting was amazing. The 7th sitting and the 6th sitting, so they were getting more sublime. I was a little bit not be able to completely be absorbed in it. So I had some thoughts, and the thoughts didn't come like just randomly. So I thought I would share these things here. I talked about this guy, Mr. M. And let me just say, there's deep cleaning in these sittings. And when I got my preceptor sitting, especially the last one, Master Chargy, I had all these thoughts and stuff from, like, I don't know, probably past lives, and they were like these images and ideas and thoughts and memories and just random thoughts were like, it was like my mind was sped up, and I was watching. It's like they took a bunch of highlights of some things to do with my life, some things to do with random things. I thought of my mom briefly at the very end, but it was like all these things were it was like fast forwarding. If you watched a highlight reel of your life and your past lives, and it was not only just like images, not even so much images, but thoughts and feelings and emotions and things, and just they were just flying by me. Like, it was so fast. And he used this, whatever his will force, the master of the system, to do whatever was left to be cleaned out was cleaned out. It was amazing. And I talked to this other guy who was made a preceptor, and he had a very similar experience. Like, he had the worst thoughts. He had one thought that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you thought that. Like, that's, it was involuntary because I went through the same thing. But, he shared with me something that was, and I won't do it here because it involves charity and, negative thought in a way. But, he had a similar experience. And, I felt the sixth sitting and the seventh sitting, specifically the sixth sitting, which I took last night, was that. So I don't know what other people experienced. I haven't read the comments about it yet. And so very deep cleaning, pulling, what was beyond what normal cleanings do. But for some odd reason, I thought about this guy, Mr. M. And Mr. M was a person I met at my first gathering. And we would meet and talk every gathering for the next, I don't know. So it was 1994. I went to my first gathering, and Chargy stopped coming in 2008. And so that's 14 years. And, Chargy would come to America, and I saw this guy. And I think this guy came to the ashram a couple times during, like, Babaji's birthday. Like, I went to the Molina ashram sometimes during Babaji's birthday or some of the other gatherings. And so I don't know how many times I saw this guy, right? But not a lot, but you'd see these people once a year, basically. And you would share this deep spiritual experience and, a deeper level of your soul energy would be pulled out at these gatherings. So it'd be more intimate. You shared this great thing. Like, it was just some special thing that happened. And so it's a little different than other acquaintances, but these people were more or less acquaintances, right? You might hear something about people, people gossip, or there's, things out there. But, I didn't talk to very many people when I wasn't at these gatherings who did the meditation. So, and occasionally you'd run into one of these people in India. And oftentimes you had past lives with them, and you would go through something with them, like, a whole adventure in India, right? They would be there for a week or 2 weeks, and you would spend a lot of time with them because you're not watching TV, you're not working, you're just hanging out, meditating and talking and socializing, which, I'm never great at, but, there's these intense experiences, cleaning and things like that. There are people around, there's a guy from Louisiana who has my same birthday. And he's just a great guy, Chris Jackson, black guy. And he's just got a really good personality. And he married an Indian woman, and I would see him from time to time. And when I brought my wife and my kids back to India, I saw him. And I always get happy when I see him because he was really supportive of me going through my preceptor stuff when I went through that epic cleaning. He was there when I got back from that trip that I got really sick at. The trip where I we got sick and the whole thing had the bus happen, which I just described in recent videos. But anyway, so there's this guy, Mr. M, and I would see him occasionally. He's about my age. He had this great chair, and he got it. It was like a folding chair that you could sit on the floor. You could carry it. It was shaped nicely. I mean, I never sat on it. but we always talk about his chair because, he got, it was like a thing that he just was some, prototype chair that he got at a sporting event, and he said it just worked great for meditation because it was very easy to carry. People would bring these chairs. A lot of times people would bring those, those thermarest mattresses that you use in camping, and they had a cover that you could fold the mattress into a chair. I had one for a little while. It didn't work. I just couldn't sit on the floor. I like to sit on the floor. I just couldn't. I tried to. I worked towards it, but my legs just don't sit cross-legged because of years of sports and things. I'm just not flexible enough. And, so all those things. And, so we weren't necessarily close, but I saw him at these gatherings. We had a pretty positive relationship. And there was a time later on my family and I went on this extended camping trip, and we stayed in North Carolina, and the closest preceptor was one who was a young guy not a young guy, but he was younger, like Mr. M was about my age, and this guy's probably about 5 or 10 years younger. I don't know, maybe same age, I don't know. And he went to Mr. M as a preceptor, and the guy had this story in which he was playing video games at night. He was playing Grand Theft Auto. Like these guys were in California, and younger guys, like or not younger guys, but people growing up in that generation. And he was playing Grand Theft Auto after starting doing Abiyasi. Now the guy was a preceptor, and he didn't think he should be playing it because it was having negative impressions on him. Right? He knew it was affecting his spiritual condition, and you can feel these things. Your spiritual condition is affected by something. And, because you go to meditate and it's just there with you. Like you watch something disturbing, or you had an argument with somebody, or, it's just there. And you're like, oh, it's hard for me to meditate because it's like your equilibrium has been affected, and you've been, you feel gross, like you have to do some cleaning. Like now you have to, these are what these deep cleanings are for. But after a while, you're expected to be more disciplined and not do things that are going to hurt your spiritual condition and not set you back. And so he was playing these video games, and it was very graphic in nature. And it didn't make him feel good, so he stopped playing it. But then he got bored. He played it like late at night, and he got really nauseous, and he realized, oh, this was bad for him. And so he had a physical effect of the thing, and he knew it was, And then he got a call from this guy, Mr. M, the next day, his preceptor. He said, "What were you doing last night?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I got this sense of you. You came to my mind. I thought of you, and he was in bed. It was like asleep or whatever. He was going to sleep, and he got a sense of it. And he got up and he threw up." Because he was in tune with this guy, right? Which just can happen with the preceptor-Abiyasi relationship. And so when my ex heard this story, she really wanted to meet Mr. M or talk to him because she thought, oh, he must be a great preceptor, that my ex was like that. But I had known Mr. X for a number of years. Just like the local preceptors I live now, I knew long before my ex did. And, I'm not social, and, I don't know how people felt about me, right? Probably not great. Like I'm not, whatever. But either way, I knew these people beforehand, before my ex did. And so Mr. M was listening to my videos. There's two people knowing Abiyasi, so I guess 3, 4 that have, that I know, who I had sort of relationships with, who I'd met and talked to. And again, these are people I would see once a year, or I saw a couple of times. And so that ended up listening to my videos. And everyone else, there's thousands of people, and there's hundreds of people that I know, or I have friends with Facebook, who are Abiyasis. They listen to my videos maybe in a negative way when I put I put one up on Facebook and it went around the mission. And my journey series is getting 8,000 views. It went from 3,000 to 4,000 views to 8,000 views. And so there was 5,000 to 6,000 Abiyasis watching my videos, and most of those people were pro-Dodgy people, and they were pissed at me, right? Some of them were calling for my execution. So that was the whole thing, right? And so, the thing happened in India, with the divorce, and I came back to America with my kids, and I was in Vegas, and Mr. M was in California somewhere. And so he contacted me, and he started to listen to my videos. And he was doing his own thing. He was talking about just heartfulness on Facebook, and he had his own thing he was doing. And he wanted to bring in some outside influences to the magazine they were doing or something. He contacted this woman who was a psychic, and I watched the woman, and I was not impressed. But he was trying to do something different. Like try to, the way things had been done in the past was very inefficient, and of course, dodgy was a joke. All those things. I was seeing him. I saw him when we got to the gathering. I think when we got back from India. I'm not sure if I saw him there. Can't remember. I remember a lot of people were pissed. Like ostracizing me because Dodgy had blown me off. So, there was he had obviously talked about me. So whatever happened with Dodgy, there's stuff that went down in India in terms of I wrote to him about getting kicked out of his birthday gathering, which was 100% his fault for his goofy rules, and whatever it was. I've told that story over and over again, that he made these rules that kids couldn't go to the gathering. Of course, he's reversed that now, and he has his grandkids sitting at his lap, very performatively. But for a little bit, he was just fucking changing rules and doing stupid shit. And I didn't know that he was a joke and he had fallen at that time because the energy was still there. But I got kicked out of the gathering, and my daughter, was yelling at me because she didn't want to leave. And we were swearing at each other in front of this guy. It was fucking brutal. She was, it was a whole thing. So it was a fucking nightmare. And I wrote to Dodgy about it. And my ex was clearly in communication with him and bad-mouthing me. And so when he came to America, I went to introduce, my car broke down, and there was a group meditation. And I dated this woman for a while. She helped me come back to America in terms of making arrangements. It's why I chose to go to Vegas, because I had no support system. As someone from the YouTube channel. She was, it was clear that it was not a good situation being in a relationship with her. If it wasn't, I knew it wasn't going to work out. But she could feel the energy, and I felt kind of responsible to help her do the practice or try the system, because she could feel the energy, and she was into the meditation, and possibly she had done some other things. And she felt the energy at the gathering. So I went to introduce her to Dodgy. My car broke down, and so she wanted to stay with me. She didn't want to go to the satsang by herself. My kids were there. But she wanted to stay with me. And so I missed the satsang, and we came in late. But we were sitting out in the hall right where Dodgy was going to leave. And I thought there'd be a good, Kamlesh would be a good time to introduce her. And Dodgy walked by me like he didn't know me. And all these people were, like when we got there, I asked this woman if we could find a preceptor. I walked there, they had like a concierge type of volunteer position of people when you go to a gathering. They tell you what's going on, and you register, and there's a whole little process. And I said, well, I have a new Abhyasi with me that could benefit from an individual sitting before Dodgy gets here. Kamlesh was going to get there. We were there 4 or 5 hours before the first meditation was going to take place. And she said, well, I'm a preceptor. And she took the woman that I was dating with her to get a sitting, but they didn't go to a place. They were just in like a parking lot. And she started grilling her about me, like all these questions, like all these things. And she came back like 15 minutes later. I said to the woman, did you get a sitting? She goes, no, this is a brand new Abhyasi. And she's, clearly there's all this gossip about me, right? Because of, just this thing that Dodgy had done. And then Dodgy's inner circle guys, who I known for years, kind of all were looking at me like I was a piece of shit, So I knew something was up. And then Dodgy walked by me. And there was more shit that happened. I won't get into it. But, he was just a piece of shit, right? Because you just don't treat anybody like that. And he was wrong. Like, he should be right because he's, the master of the system. You don't get things wrong. But of course, he folded and turned into a cult, and he sucks, and there's all that. But I didn't know any of that at the time. This is all part of the story. And so Mr. M contacted me. At some point, he called me, or whatever he did. I don't know how he contacted me, but I remember getting a phone call from him. And he said he was listening to my videos, and he was a person that said, you don't do any introduction, you don't do any sign off. Like people don't know when the video, you don't do a greeting. And so that's where I had to come up with a greeting and a sign off. So he was responsible, he contributed something, which I was grateful for. That was good feedback. That's the kind of feedback that was helpful to my videos, because I didn't, I'm just awkward with shit like that. So I didn't do it. I used to just talk. So in the beginning of the video, I just started talking like I was in mid-sentence, like it was just, and then I wouldn't say anything like the videos ended. So, which was not good for the viewers, and that's helped everybody here. It's helped me videos. So, that was good feedback from him. And we had some good conversation. He was a little bit of a truther, a different kind of truther, more liberal. But he was, seeing these things, and he understood there's a lot of truther stuff in Sajmark, a lot of it. I mean, it's the ultimate truther stuff. It's reality at dawn, right? The ultimate truth. It's beyond truther things. Truther stuff is just about the government and, conspiracies and, controllers and man-made shit. Where Sajmark is about divine truth, which is far deeper and more, more truthful than the other stuff. But anyways, this guy was one of the few people that could understand what I was doing in my videos, and we talked. We were a little bit closer now because of this, whatever. Both sharing something that we were kind of outsiders, and we understood things that the majority of the Abiasis didn't understand. And my son got his first 3 sittings. We went to this Master Charji, the third Masters of the Systems gathering, July 24th is his birthday. And we went to the ashram. They had bought a bowling alley. There was a bunch of rich, mostly Indian Abiasis who lived in Silicon Valley. And we went there to the, bowling alley that had been converted into an ashram. It's pretty nice. And that was when I first saw that Daji gave a talk, and he wasn't talking about Charji, which is the Indian guru culture is so, embedded into their whole everything, their social system, and elders, and respecting elders. And, Master Charji, towards the end of his life, said, with Daji there, that the disciple can never exceed the master of the system. I found the exact quote. This guy, I call the Daji truther. He's the guy who really dislikes Daji and is trying to expose him for the fraud he is. And so he has this picture of Daji next to Charji. And this was from October 26th, The Universe is Love. It was a speech that Charji gave, October 2014. He would die in December 20th. So almost, not almost, less than 2 months before his death, he said this. And he said, the guru is the guru, and the disciple is always the disciple. He can never transcend his guru. This is one of the spiritual laws. So to think that you have become superior to your guru is, I wouldn't say a sin, because in Sajmarg we only have one sin, and that is of ingratitude. It is the first step toward your downfall. And it's clear that Daji's not grateful to Charji, which is completely fucked, right? And I can understand, everyone goes through anger or, your own issues you have with authority or with God. If you have past lives, I figured out I had a past life where I was very bitter towards God. I died bitter towards God, angry at God for whatever reason. And, I kind of knew the reasons. I'm not going to get into that here. It's a whole thing. But, I had a past life. And when I had that cleaned out, my spiritual life took off, my internal world. It was amazing. I talk about this intensely. But everyone has their issues with your, parent issues, dad issues, whatever it is, God issues. And the guru becomes a catch-all for those things, right? Your own resistance, your own ego's resistance with your, things that you're supposed to do, and things that you don't want to do, and this gets taken out on the guru. Like kids get mad at their parents when they're adolescents. It's this kind of thing, right? But Dodgy somehow thought he was better than Chargy, which he has clearly said in so many different ways in his speeches. And he's tried to rob Chargy of his legacy. Chargy had the most written material, the most content that was very helpful for all of us. Books and talks. Chargy gave so many talks, epic talks, that were published in books and put on DVD, and they existed on the web. And Dodgy's scrubbed pretty much all of them. The books, they're not reprinting any of the books. They're not. There's one book that Chargy wrote about Babaji called My Master. But, Dodgy was disrespecting him. And I didn't see it at first until 2017. And I said to I was at this gathering, and it's Chargy's birthday. And he's not talking about Chargy at all. And he used to, when Chargy was alive, Chargy this, Chargy that, master this, master that. And at first he continued that. But now he was singing a different tune. And all the other masters, Chargy had said in one of these talks that he never thought of himself as the master, which is, you can't think I am the master. That's an ego thought, right? There's no I am. The people think you're the master, and they pull the master out of you. And the master is, in the case of Saj Marg, the previous master who's merged with his disciple. His spiritual essence is merged in his disciple. And without that, you're fucked. Like, you can't be a master because, you have to have oversight. You have to have a divine essence that is, you have to have these divine beings, and one specific divine being that is overseeing. You need that kind of level of where there's some upward, where you're looking up and you have something to obtain, right? Something for somebody to guide you, and these things. Even on an etheric level, even after the master's dead, his essence is there guiding you. And that's kind of the beauty of Sajmark's system. You're never thinking of yourself as, oh, I'm the guy. I'm that dude. You're just never any of that. You can't be that, right? And so it was clear that Dodgy was ungrateful, and he had thought he had surpassed Chargy. And, it took me a while to fully understand this, right? But this was evident at that gathering. But this guy, Mr. M, had arranged for my son to get my youngest son, who had now turned, I think, 17 or 16. There's a woman who we met, American woman, who I never really spoke to before, but she was really nice, good person. And she had a good relationship with my son. Like she had an older, her son was now in his 20s. Like she had been a part of these younger people who had been from Mobile, Alabama, Alabama, where this guy Clark Powell had a bunch of Abiasis that were college kids that started. And they were kind of hippie-ish, they were whatever they were. A lot of them quit. But she was a preceptor, and she lived kind of near us, not too far. She was on the West Coast. And I had asked her if she would give my son his first 3 sittings. I was trying to help him get started. And things got weird, whatever. She ended up not going. And she was going to go to this gathering, but she couldn't go. And so there's this other guy who was a great preceptor who gave me a sitting at the airport. He showed at the airport at midnight in L.A., and he gave me a sitting when I was on my way to India in 1995, I believe. 94, whatever it was, 95, I guess. Was on my way to, it was 95. And so when I was on my way to India for the first time. And so, amazing, like just dedicated person. This guy, Mr. M, this guy, he was Mr. M's preceptor. Mr. M arranged, contact, because I didn't have this guy's information, and to give my son his first 3 sittings. And so, so these are the things that were there, right? And so Mr. M called me out of the blue. Like at that point, I don't think he had let me know that he was listening to my channel. But he called me out of the blue and said, these things, maybe a year later, that next year. And we talked on and off, probably once every month, once every 2 months. And he was one of the few people that I was in contact with that did the meditation. And the few people that I was in contact with either faded away for one reason or another, right? Partly because, I was being ostracized, and I was, there's these people that just, in the mission, they're like shitbags. Like they're written in some of the diaries and Chargie's diaries. They're people that, fell in one way or another, like people who turned on the system or, whatever. There are a few people who had blogs, and they, just these people who are just persona non gratas. And one day I realized, I'm one of those people now. And nothing that I had done would justify it, but, my ex basically besmirching me and making up shit or exaggerating things or, not giving the full story and all these things. And, just me being the way there's a time where I saw a picture of me and my ex together, and I'd already known this from other experiences, and I knew there's no way that they were going to think that take my side of the thing. Like she was manipulative, and she was much more social, and she was great at playing the victim. And no matter how this thing played out, no one was going to take it wasn't. And I accepted that, and I didn't care. And at some point I was like, I don't care what these motherfuckers think of me. It was a liberating moment. Like I was like, why do I don't even like most of these people. I mean, not that I dislike them, but I don't feel on a personality level, we're not the same. We're not, like you feel as a truther, you don't resonate with other people. And most of the people that do the meditation, some of them are wonderful people, saintly people, but they're not my people. They're not like the kind, that we all do this. We all love Saj Marg, and we love the effects of the system. We love the transmission, but we're not necessarily, people who would be friends or understand each other than that. It's our one thing we have in common. And there's really not much else, right? And then some of these people are just straight up assholes. The ones that are surrounding Chargy, they were these mostly Indian businessmen, rich guys, who were just really arrogant, who felt themselves and just were, they just were like those, like rich people who fucking are just dicks and think they're better than they are in the whole thing. So I was like, I don't care about those guys. I didn't like those guys anyway. So, it was liberating for me. It was really helpful for me because it was easy for me to break away from this cult, like this incompetent cult that was now, this great spiritual organization that had helped so many of us evolve spiritually was being cultified by this moron Daji, but in a worst possible stupid way that was so obvious and so failed, right? So, it was a cult of stupidity, really. And so, but I didn't know all that at the time. And so this guy, Mr. M, and I talked occasionally, and he was one of the few people. And, I at some point he just stopped calling, and I reached out to him a couple times. He didn't call me back or text me back, and I was like, all right, well, that guy's gone, right? And then I saw him at the gathering. I went to India in 2020. This is right before COVID. He's talking to this woman that I had known, and I came up, and it was an uncomfortable exchange. And I was like, all right, well, that's it. Like, we're done. But I said something like, we had fallen out of contact, and I changed my number. And I think I had sent him my number originally saying I'm changing my number, and he hadn't got back to me. So, my daughter had committed suicide the following year in March, the very end of March. And so, anyways, I saw him at the gathering in 2020. And then I Facebook messaged him my info, and he never got back to me. So I thought, all right, this thing's over. We're not going to, it's just one more person. Again, it wasn't some big loss. We were just acquaintances. It wasn't some big thing. And then I got talking to a few different people, senior people, about how bad the YouTube channel was. And, Daji had made this horrific video about suicide where he blamed the loved ones of the suicide victims for being responsible. Just saying horrific, stupid shit. And they had zombies in it. It was just such a bad video. Like, it was one of the worst YouTube videos. And some of the people who I had told about Heartfulness had seen the video, and like this, you've seen this video, it's horrible. Like, one of them had a daughter or somebody who had tried to commit suicide, so people took this personally, and it was so fucking egregious. And there was a series of bad videos. There's this clown who has his own Facebook feed where he's trying to become like a financial / spiritual guru, and he's the guy in charge of the Heartfulness YouTube channel, and the guy's just a fucking moron. And the videos he would post on his Facebook page, I used to show to my wife, and we'd make fun of him. Like I wanted to destroy the videos on my channel because they're so horrible. And this guy was the person in charge of the Heartfulness YouTube channel, and he made the worst personal videos, and he was hiring people to make really bad videos. They had professional actors and shit in this video. I mean, they spent money collective donation money. And that's when I was, began to sense that Dodgy just sucked. Like this was such a failure. Like he was, he thought he was better than Chargy, but Chargy was an epic person. He rose to the highest levels of his professional life. He spoke multiple languages, and he was just good at everything. Like the guy was just very efficient, competent person, the most competent person I ever met, just aside from being the master. Like that went along with it because he was good at everything, right? And he was good at public speaking, and he just had this knack. And Dodgy didn't have any of these qualities. Dodgy had almost no really redeemable qualities. He was goofy. He was, he was inarticulate. And he seemed to be getting worse. Like he was having maybe cognitive issues. I was told that he had cancer. I never got that confirmed, but he was breaking down physically, and he just lost his way, right? And so I talked to these people, and this one guy said, the senior guy said, there were a bunch of people trying to fix the YouTube channel, and one of them was Mr. M, and he calls me out of the blue again. And I said, was weird that you didn't, whatever happened, like I addressed that he kind of blew me off. And he said, well, like he excused it, it was kind of weird or whatever, but I didn't care because it wasn't like, my feelings were hurt, because we didn't really know each other that well. But he said that he was getting divorced from his wife, and this woman he was talking to was a European woman. And she was, she's a Danish person. So she was one of the original Babaji full preceptors, famous Denmark. There's a lot of these, Babaji made 6 people full preceptors, which is, higher level commitment than a normal preceptor. And a couple of them used drugs. In fact, I think maybe the one of her dad might have been the guy. I don't know. And some of them even quit. Like one guy used LSD and he had some issues that Babaji had to fix. It was a whole thing. But they were very famous people, and she was often at the ashram. We talked a couple times. And she was married, and, apparently they were both leaving their spouses to be with each other. And he lived in California, and she had a business in Europe and in Denmark, and I don't even know how their relationship was going to work. But they didn't want everyone to know about it, so when I came up and they were talking to each other, he said that's why it was awkward. And I was like, okay, or whatever. But still, like you could have responded whenever. Like, And at some point he asked about my divorce, right? And I made it clear to him, like in terms of my dealing with all these people, that it wasn't like there was a war anymore. I was over my divorce, but my ex had said things about me, and her view of me was, something she constructed for her own psychological reasons, right? Okay, so this thing's going longer than I thought. I'm going to put this at the end of my video as well, because there's something I want to talk about, change of consciousness. And, I'm getting to all that. Like, I have to tell the backstory, because without the backstory, you don't understand why I would make the decisions that I did. And so, people can see some of my flaws. I'm kind of an asshole. I say mean things, whatever, right? I'm able to see good and bad things in people. I just have a good, one of my abilities, like we all have abilities, is being able to read other people and see things, right? Whatever it might be. Like in terms of, as a counselor, I was good at doing diagnoses and understanding what makes people tick. And I'm interested in why people do what they do. I've always found that fascinating, why they make decisions, finding out what goes on inside of them. And then, of course, with Saj Marg and the meditation, which is all about, the insides of people, what makes a person, internally, what their internal makeup is, right? And so, you know, I'm good, that's just good at these things. And once in a while, I would say things that people didn't know about themselves, and I'd say it in not the nicest way, right? Or dickish way. And so, I have these things, and I'm not social, and I get overwhelmed, and I isolate, right? I shut people out, things like this. And so, I had anger issues, and I was frustrated and overwhelmed for the majority of my first marriage. So, like, I had these things, and they were within the normal range. Like, just I'm a little bit of a different person than somebody you find out an average person, a normal person. But in terms of a relationship and shit you have to put up with the other person, I was in the normal range. Like, I had good things. I was affectionate. There's various things that I would bring to a relationship, and then I had my liabilities and my frustrations and my own, some scars and things like that. But my ex had severe mental issues. She had been hospitalized for suicide. She was, according to her, this is her story, which she told me. Like, this isn't me, telling you her story. This is the stuff she told me about her life, that her mother punched her in the back. Her dad sexually abused her and physically abused her, and her mom physically and emotionally abused her. And her mom was worse, according to her and her brother. This is the stories that she told me, and conversations she had with him. They both felt the mother was worse than the dad, and he was a sex offender. He was CEO of a company, some Fortune 500 company, and he got fired for sexual misconduct or sexual harassment of like a secretary or something. Years after, the thing happened with my ex, and she had these severe abuse incidences, and after she was sexually abused when she was 18 and coming home for Thanksgiving from college, she went back to college and tried to kill herself and was hospitalized. I think she was hospitalized again, was put on a psychiatric hold and had to go into counseling. And, the following year she told everybody, and her mom wrote her a letter that it was her fault and these things, right? And so, like, she was like fucked up from all that. And I had worked with abused kids, so I was aware of these things. And I had thought that she had done a pretty good job. But like within the first time I met her, like first time I went up, she was a preceptor and I went to visit. She was married, and I went to visit her and her family. Like, we were the only two preceptors, Abiasis, in the whole. I lived in New Mexico and she lived in Denver. And she told me she was sexually abused, I think in a phone conversation before we even met. Like, within the first 20 minutes of meeting this person, she would tell you she was sexually abused. And she was a perpetual victim. She talked about these stories that her mother punched her in the back and she went blind. And later she would go to some psychotherapist who say, oh, you're a hysteric. She had hysterical blindness. There's a condition where people, have some kind of hysterical, they call it hysterical blindness. And there's these other things that they're considered being a hysteric, where you have some kind of episodes, but she couldn't see for her brain stopped letting her see because of these abuse incidents, right? And she had all these stories of abuse because she learned to use these stories to manipulate people and always be the victim, right? And so, my ex can be defined. I've talked about this, and here I have this great quote. This is how I define my ex. The victim stance is a powerful one. The victim is always morally right, neither responsible nor accountable, and forever entitled to sympathy. And so my ex had two kinds of people, especially with her relationships with men. She would put you in the hero category in the beginning, and then slowly move you over to the abuser category as your relationship proceeded. And I was really stressed out and not great in the beginning when she gave me the hero narrative. Like, I was resistant to the marriage. I felt overwhelmed. I was, it's part of me felt tricked into it, or, whatever. I was unaccepting of the circumstances. I wasn't fully on board. And it was so stressful, and she was going through a divorce and the whole thing. And she did manipulate the situation, and, there was major red flags with things that, I had to ignore. And, there were things that were just difficult. she would flip out and have these psychological breakdowns where we had an argument and I'd have to go hide the knives. This affected my kids. There was one time she was, out in this old broken down barn that we had, and it was like November, probably 40 degrees out, and she had taken off her shirt, and she was holding a knife to her chest and rocking back and forth like she was, when I went up there, and I don't know if she was, like, some of it seemed performative. She would age regress or have these alternate personalities show up, like multiple personalities and shit like that. And she would, threaten to commit suicide or say she wanted to commit suicide and blame it on me, right? And say, you make me feel like I want to kill myself, things like that, right? So, and I'm not saying I'm a victim. I'm just saying it sucked. And when you have to deal with somebody like this, unless you deal with somebody like this, you don't know what it is. And it was constant. And these, totally unstable. You never knew what was going to set the person off. And, you're walking on eggshells, literally. Multiple psychological issues and just never taking full responsibility. And as Abiyasi's, everything comes from God. Everything that happens in your life is a result of things that you did in the past. So even the worst type of situations are explained away by some skaras and things that your soul signed off on, because your soul, there's your life is sort of mapped out. Not sort of, your life is mapped out before you come down here. And you have these events that are going to unfold, and they're for your spiritual benefit, and they're results of things from your past, right? Past lives and whatever else, right? Whatever your past existence was. And so there's reasons for everything. And that if you want to blame anybody, blame God. But she was, loved being a victim and loved using these, the victim consciousness. Did I read I don't think I read the thing. So here's what it says. The victim stance is a powerful one. The victim is always morally right, neither responsible nor accountable or forever entitled to sympathy. I think I did read it. But that defined my ex. Like, I read that. I'm like, yeah, that was what it was like living with her. And it was horrible. And, when she moved me to the villain category or the abuser category, she started to make things up about me that I knew weren't true. But, I couldn't confront her on those things because they would result in, some kind of a fight. Like, her vision of her reality of what was going on, my reality were completely different. And, I had to absorb a lot of shit. Like when she was rocking back and forth with a knife pointed to her chest, I felt like I hated her. Like before that, like we had these bad fights, and I felt like most of them were, 90% her fault, especially near the end where I just gave up. Like I didn't, complain. I didn't even say things because they would result in these fights that always ended up, sometimes the things would go on for weeks. And, she would get psychologically stabilized, and everything would stop. She was supposed to be homeschooling the kids. I mean, she would just have these mental breakdowns anyway, sometimes nothing to do with me. And so I stopped feeding into them. I did my best not to contribute. And she would still go off and just, she'd get like triggered in some way, and she'd find a way to try to provoke a fight. And I would resist. I could see it coming, and she would just be saying things and doing things all the time to try to provoke me, right? And this was, we went on for years, so it was hell. And, I would have to, at some point, I would have to apologize when I knew it was mostly her fault. And I hated doing that. Like, I don't care about it now, but like it was not only just lying, but I just felt like I had to absorb and pretend I believed in her twisted reality. And, I had to like endorse her view of things, or she would continuously spiral. Like I had to say, oh, basically you're right. I'm a piece of shit. It was like, and, it sucked doing that. Like, and when I, was liberated from this relationship, I said I was never going to deal with that shit again, right? I have real issues, real things that people could say about me. But when people make shit up, that's why in some of these comments I respond to them. When people make shit up that's not true, I reject it. I have to reject it, right? Just because, it's something that they want me to be or they need me to be. She needed me to be this for her psychological well-being because she couldn't confront what a fucking nightmare she was for all of us involved, right? And so I made this rule that anybody who listened to her view of me and, I wasn't going to have a relationship with. Anybody who was in her camp, and this wasn't like because I felt like some kind of war. I just didn't want people can believe what they want about me, and they can say what they want about me. I don't give a shit. Just don't say it to me. Like, just fucking don't, try to stick that shit on me. I'm not playing that role for you. I'm not being that whatever you need me to be in that situation, because you suck, right? When people make up shit about you when it's not true, because they're just paranoid, or they're in their fucking, their butthurt, and they just want to, they just make up some scenario to make themselves feel better. They put negative qualities on, and also positive qualities. I've often, I reject those as well. When people want to see me as some spiritual guru master type, something that I'm not, like people who have real positive views of me on this channel who don't know me. And I'm like, don't put shit on me that's not true just because you need it, right? Don't make me into something better than I am or worse than I am because of you. Like, that's been my overall rule. Like, I don't want other people's delusions, their distorted reality, and don't include me in that shit, right? Like, don't, and people inevitably do that. So, when you're around people, they're giving you feedback in the way they see you, and you start seeing yourself that way, right? So when it's destructive to your spiritual evolution, which it was. And so when I, was able to free myself from that, or get freed, because, it was beyond my control. I mean, I was blessed with this relationship ending. But I was like, anybody who's in her camp, whatever it is, we're just not cool anymore, right? There's no being friend. Like when you have, like a contentious divorce, and there's like friends have to choose sides, right? And it was clear that everyone's going to choose her side. And I was like, cool with it, right? Because I'm not social, and of course Dodgy ended up being a total piece of shit, and so that was part of it as well, because I'm right about Dodgy, which that's undeniable, and I'm certainly right about my ex, and I'm on the right side of things, and I don't not that is the barometer of anything, but that's part of it, right? So this guy, started to contact me again, and we had a few more conversations, and then he told me that when he heard about my daughter committing suicide, he didn't feel comfortable reaching out to me. Like, he just, whatever. He didn't say anything to me. And I didn't want people to do that, because I didn't want to be in a position where I had to make them feel good. Like, I had to, like, they weren't going to help me, right? Like, people, and I said this when I told people on this YouTube channel, when I said my daughter committed suicide, this is a thing, but you don't need to say anything, because I didn't want people 3 years from, somebody stumbles on my old video, and they come in and they say, 3 years or 4 years after it happens, people stumble on an old video, and they say, I'm sorry about this, and it just brings it back up, right? It's just, it's not helpful to me. Like, it's, people saying they feel bad doesn't make it better in any shape, way, or form, right? It doesn't make me feel better. There's people who have said horrible things about it. Accused me, said horrible things to me about it. And I'm like, no matter what you say, it's not worse than my daughter killing herself, right? No matter how you, want to make me feel, and no matter what you say about me, or what horrible thing you say about it, it makes you a piece of shit, but, it doesn't do anything to me, because I'm already, like, it's not going to be as bad as, whatever you say isn't going to be as bad as what actually happened. Her dying, right? Like, fucking, and all the stuff that led up to it. And so, part of it is my daughter started to copy my ex cutting herself and self-abusing. And my daughter ended up being at the same age. And I'd warned my daughter about this, and she got roughed up. They put her on a psychiatric hold. She, my younger son, who lived with me, was visiting. My two older kids lived with my ex, or lived near her. They lived in apartments. And my son was visiting, and my ex decided not to tell Anna that he was coming. And she flipped out, and she cut herself so bad that her older brother, my eldest son, walked in on her. She was bleeding profusely, and they called the ambulance, and they put her on a psychiatric hold. And she's really resistant to authority, and she was kind of violent. She's very fighty, and she tried to fight her. They did some things, whatever it is. They tried to control her, and she's not I mean, and I told her this. I warned her about this. I'm like, if this keeps on going, I'm going to have to call the authorities when she was cutting herself. Like, this is bad, and it'll be bad for the family. It'll be a whole fucking thing, right? And so she didn't listen to me, of course. She doesn't, because she was, very obstinate. But they roughed her up, and she was traumatized. My younger son later talked to her about it. Like, that was one of the things that led to her suicide, was her being locked up and put on a psychiatric hold, and then, and then she didn't make things worse, so they extended it. She was in there for a while. And I knew that would happen. Like, I knew her personality, and I knew those things. But, you just can't prevent these things, right? You can talk to people about it, but they're just going to do their thing. And so, but she was on a psychiatric hold for self-abuse, just like my ex, almost at the same time in their lives. She copied her behaviors. She copied her, self-abusive behaviors and many of her other behaviors, which was, a real fucking bummer, right, on every level. Because I was hoping to protect my kids from these psychological breakdowns my ex would have. And, it messed up our whole fucking family and the whole thing. And it just drained the shit out of me. So, I was done with it. When I was free of it, I'm like, I don't want to hear any of these bullshit things that I had to live with for years. And any relationship I have, when people start making shit up about me or trying to make me into something I'm not, I'm like, well, that relationship's like immediately over. And anybody in her camp or anybody who was listening to her, I just didn't want that reflected back to me. And I just, I've made it my policy. I'm just, I'm worn out by all that stuff, like all that drama stuff and all that, I just, either you get it or you don't, right? Like, if you're somebody who would want to have a relationship with me in some capacity, that I will communicate, exactly what I think or feel about something. I'm not lying about anything. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not trying to manipulate the situation. And, don't make shit up. Don't think, don't imagine shit that's not there, right? Don't put things in that don't exist, good, bad, or different. Just, like, I'm as aware of as I could be. There might be some things that I'm not aware of, but usually I am. Like the good, the bad, and the ugly that go on inside my eternal existence. I meditate, I reflect. I'm introverted. And so I know what goes on. I know what my thinking process is. And, I'm not ashamed or congratulatory. I'm not patting myself on the back or beating myself up. I recognize that I am, what I am as a person, and it's, it's okay. I'm not great. I'm not horrible. I'm doing the best I can on my spiritual path and doing all I can do. And it could be more, it could be less, right? But it's all I can do at this particular time. I'm doing my best. And so don't exaggerate how good I am because you need that to be that way. And don't demonize me for shit that's inside you that has nothing to do with me or who I am, right? Those are the things there's just, basic fucking boundaries. And so I think we were talking about going back to this thing with Mr. M. So now we can get into this story, this whole thing that I went through last night, and so this happened 2022. And we were talking about, the suicide video and how bad it was. And this guy knew about it. Everyone, people knew it was really fucking bad. And it was a series of videos where they hired a production company and actors, and they wrote these horrible scripts. And they were like, no way going to bring people to heartfulness. They were so off-putting, and they were really stupid. Like, the R word was like just really stupid. Like, just fucking goofy, right? And so we were talking about that, and I guess my daughter came up, and he said, I'm sorry I didn't call you. And, and maybe the next conversation he goes, I talked to your ex. He called my ex, right? And, my ex, I'm sure, milked this thing with my daughter as much as she could for her own sympathy. And she, the fact that she modeled self-abuse, like one of the big things that happened was in India, there was a woman who was learning homeschooling from my ex, and we had a relationship with their family. I would liked her husband. We talked, fairly frequently. We'd see each other at the ashram. I had bought chairs from him in the past, and he had a nice manner. And my kids hung out with her son, who was homeschooling, and he was a kid who would tell Dodgy about the midbrain activation, which became the Brighter Mind scam. He would demonstrate this for Dodgy. They were from the same part of the country, so this is part of the thing. And I knew the woman thought pretty highly of my ex. And I told her husband that I was getting divorced, but I hadn't, and I didn't want to talk to people about it. Like, we were leaving India. There's conversations where it doesn't benefit me. Like these conversations where, I'm going through something, but then I have to make somebody else feel better about this thing, right? Like she was upset that we were getting divorced because in India you just don't. And she comes up to me and she was like, she had this look on her face. I'm like, fuck. And so I said, we're getting divorced. And she said, why? Well, it's like, I couldn't get into all the stuff I told you because I just didn't want to talk about all that shit, right? And I said, well, she cheated on me, which, isn't really, that was the blessing, right? So the way that happened was my daughter, Anna, we were out at a movie. I used to take the kids to movies like every Tuesday, Wednesday. And we had a really great, we watched this Disney movie that was, I didn't want to go to see it, but it was all that was playing. But it ended up being really good. It was about this little rabbit, all the Illuminati shit aside, all the Disney stuff. But it was Jason Bateman played a fox. And I don't know who played the rabbit, who voiced the rabbit. But they went in, there's this great scene where the fox and the rabbit go in and they go to the motor vehicle department. And the motor vehicle department workers are all sloths. Like there's some wonderful scenes in it, like funny, that were, it was a good movie. The thing was called Zootopia. It was one of the better animated movies. It's surprising from Disney. And Anna wasn't coming to the movies with us as often. And we used to eat at this little Italian restaurant that was in the mall. And getting food in India that's like Western food is usually a nightmare, but this place was pretty good. And we were having a great day. Like it was this thing where it was just a nice day with the kids. And Anna told me, Mom's paralyzed. Because she was in conversation. I hadn't talked to my ex in about 2 or 3 months. And so it was like I got kicked in the stomach. And I was worried that she was going to die and my kids would feel guilty. And, she had tried to get some of the kids to come home and take care of her. It was a whole fucking thing, right? And I was worried that, she went off her medication. It was her thyroid medication. And her whole face changed. Like she didn't even look like the same person. She had these weird, she just got fucked up. And, it was a whole thing. Her thyroid medication was like, you need these enzymes that your thyroid was gone and she's trying to reboot it. It was a whole thing. And I felt kind of stunned and shocked and I felt bad for her. And I hadn't, wanted to contact her. So I wrote her something saying, are you okay? And she didn't respond. And so I was kind of worried about her and worried about my kids. And, and a couple days later, I looked at her Facebook page and her daughter's boyfriend was saying, I sent a video, maybe you and some guy's name would enjoy it. And I knew she was cheating on me. She was with this guy, right? And so the paralyzed thing had happened months before. And so it's a weird thing that happened. I don't know if Anna was just trying to wreck the day. I don't even know. Like it just went the way it did. But then I knew that she was with somebody else, which, that meant our relationship was over. Like I knew our relationship was over, but there hadn't been a conversation like we got to get a divorce kind of thing. And again, we hadn't talked for months. And I was taking care of the kids in a very, crisis, right? I had a daughter who was acting out and self-abusing. I had another daughter who was sick all the time. I had 2 of my kids were drastically behind in homeschooling. And our family had, we had planned this whole intergenerational family farm and we had a whole plan and the whole plan had blown up and now I had to reinvent everything. And, I was left out of the homeschooling because I'm not good at that kind of thing anyway, right? And my ex had failed so drastically about that. And, I had some inheritance from my mom's death. And I was coming back to America with, what ended up being like $5,000. And having to start over with a YouTube channel and fucking 4 kids that were fucked up and a weird divorce, right? This is the stuff I was going through. And so, she had, so the reason I could say is that she cheated, but it was so much more. The cheating was like the me being released, where I was like, fucking thank God I'm out of this fucking thing, right? I wasn't, it wasn't, the real reason for the divorce, but it's something I could say to people. So I say to this woman, she cheated on me, right? Or she was with another guy. And this Indian woman who started bad mouthing her, like, or just being like, I could tell she was like, disgusted. And so I'm like, well, now I have to make this woman feel better or just give some, so I start defending my ex, which, I mean, I didn't want to do, but I just did, just to get out of this awkward social situation. And I said, well, she was sexually abused, which, was her excuse for everything. And, I was just saying that just to get out, like the whole thing. And the woman looks at me and goes, who wasn't? And I realized, how many women have been sexually abused, and even men, and they live, much better lives, and they don't fucking fuck up their families and don't treat their spouses like shit. It was like this moment where I was like, yeah, I mean, I'd known about all the plague of sexual abuse because I worked in that industry, with sex offenders and, victims of sexual abuse. And I knew about lots of it because, how the way I saw the world after I read these files of what these kids had been through. And, I worked in 2 different treatment centers. And, and I always thought my ex had done a pretty good job. Then I was realizing she did a shitty job because she was always feeling like a victim. And she was reliving those dynamics throughout her life. She always had a rescuer or a hero, and she always had an abuser. And she would go to the rescuer and the hero and say, I'm getting abused over here by this other person. She'd triangulate and turn people against people. And she was doing that to me. And it was completely fucked up after all that I had endured and how shitty she was to be married to. What a fucking nightmare that was, right? And it was, a great thing. Like, it was liberating in the sense I was like, yeah, it is fucked up. Like, especially when you're an Abhyasi in Saj Marg, no matter what happens to you, you have to understand that your soul signed off on it. And that's coming from God. And it's some scars and things that happened in the past. That's what got me through this divorce and relationship, is that I saw how, this was good for me. Going through this, as sucky as it was, it really helped me spiritually. It really helped to clean me out and clean some of these things out. It helped soften me and make me more sensitive and less forceful. And, and deal with this bitterness I had towards God. Like, it just, and so, like, I didn't act like a victim because I had a shitty wife and a shitty marriage and a shitty fucking life. I just was like, yeah, this is, whatever you did in the past was the result of what is happening now. And I took these things, in terms of the teaching and the philosophy of the Saj Marg, and it was extremely beneficial. And ultimately, I ended up being grateful for all these things, right? So getting back to it. So I'm having a conversation with this guy, Mr. M, and he says that he contacted my ex after my daughter Anna died. And I'm like, she would totally work this thing, and she was going to get tons of sympathy from people, right? And I didn't want sympathy. I didn't even want these interactions. But it was fucked up that this guy, he had heard my story. Like, he was one of the few people that I told my side of the story to. And during that period of time, I had reached out to him a few different times, and he just blew me off. But he was having conversations with my ex the same time he was having conversations with me, and I kind of made it clear to him, and, when I talked about this in the videos, that wasn't, you choose one side or the other, I don't care, but just, you can't do it both ways. But I thought it was fucked up that he, called her up as soon as she heard about my daughter and never, reached out to me. It was just like fucked up. Like, again, not that I wanted it, but, so I cut him off, and I talked about it in the YouTube videos, like my Journey series. And he listened to it. And he then called me up and said, I didn't name names. I called him Mr. M or whatever it was, like, and I mean, that's what Master Chargy did. There was things that were written about people that was not flattering in diaries and shit. And they're like Mr. X or Mr. Y or Mr. J or something like this. Like, people might know who it is, but they wouldn't name them and they wouldn't disparage them because it was just, it was things, stories were important. The people had to be, these things should be known. They're Saj Marg stories. And I'm glad that they include these stories, but they didn't name the people. Chargy published his diaries and people turned on him, and, some of the people he named, like Dr. K.C. Varachari, but he was dead. Things like this. So this guy said he thought it was unfair that I was saying these things, but everything I said was based in truth. There was some of it would be like my interpretation or my reading the situation, which might be not 100% accurate, but it was in the ballpark of being accurate. Like it was not like some kind of a reach, right? And so, I was meditating last night and I thought about this and I couldn't remember what he had done. Like I knew it was something to do with my daughter's suicide. Then I remembered, oh yeah, he didn't reach out to talk to me, but he did talk to her. And then, we had a conversation about it and I said, this fucked up. And, you know from the story I just told. So, but I couldn't remember it. And then it came to me that the reason that he had reached out to her, and again, this is my interpretation, but the reason he had reached out to her and not me is because he knew that everyone was thinking I was a piece of shit. And he knew Dodgy was on her side. And that was the other thing, right? That Dodgy chose her side and her side was wrong because Dodgy's a piece of shit and she sucks. And, not that I don't suck, but, in this circumstance, it was much worse to be me in that relationship than it was to be her. I mean, no matter what she says about me or what she thinks about me or what I really am, and as much as I might have sucked as a husband, you can't, when somebody has mental breakdowns, and some of it just seemed performative, and it goes against the teachings of something she's supposed to believe in. She never took responsibility. She always felt like a victim. You can't, you can't work with that, right? Like it's just, one of the things was I was telling my wife this, because my wife, my wife that I'm married to now is a good sleeper. And she often falls asleep while we're watching TV shows. And so I just watch something else. I'll watch basketball or something else I'm watching. And she'd apologize. And I said, no, it's fine. And I really appreciate you being a good sleeper because my ex had insomnia. And if I would get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, or if I would just even sometimes roll over, she would wake up and not go back to sleep. And she would blame me and say I was the one who was insomnia. Like I couldn't even move in bed, or she would, when she would wake up, and then like she would be pissed at me like the whole next day, or whatever. Like that's the kind of shit I live with. And her insomnia continued because she had it before we were together, and she had it after. My son was talking to me about it a couple of years ago, right? Which of course I knew because of all of it, right? But all the fucking shit I had been through, and her insomnia was another part of the whole, shitty, insomnia is a really difficult thing. And she had so many physical and psychological issues. And it's a fucking, nightmare. It was a drain on me on every possible way. And she was sabotaging everything. It was just bad, right? And so, unless you live through something like that with somebody like this, and some of you have, or you are close to something like this, you don't understand. Like nobody understands what it was like. And it's indescribable because it's just the way you wake up and the walking on eggshells and the whole thing, and just it's like you're in this, you get sucked into this person's psychological deprivation. Somebody who's, on the cusp of being institutionalized or killing themselves or whatever it is, right? And you get sucked into that vortex, and, their condition affects you. And that's part of Sage Marg, where you're, the people that are around you, if they're gross or they're twisted, you absorb some of their stuff, especially anybody that you love. Because when you love people, there's a connection, right? There's a connection with them. And their stuff becomes your stuff. What's going on inside them becomes stuff inside you. And most people experience this with their significant others. Like one of the great things about divorce, and I'm not saying divorce is a great thing, but one of the great things about divorce is that you start, when you get divorced, all of a sudden things that you used to think are part of you disappear, especially undesirable things. Sometimes they're good things and they're a bummer, right? You didn't appreciate them, but that happens as well. But oftentimes you realize, oh my God, this stuff that I used to think was in me is really, it was from this other person, right? Like they were affecting your internal condition. And so it just sucked. But, last night I realized, for whatever reason this came up doing this city. And I realized, again, I don't feel anything about it. Like I couldn't even remember the details. It's not something I think about. I'm not holding on to some emotion about it. But I realized that this guy, at least in terms of my understanding, and this is the idea that came to me, the reason he chose her side in a sense was because Dodgy and all these other fucking pieces of shit in the mission who got it wrong, not about me, about Dodgy and the rest of it, were saying that I was a piece of shit, right? Which, again, all that stuff made it easier for me to just distance myself from the whole debacle that became, the heartfulness cult, this cult of stupidity. Anyways, I want to wrap this up, but there's something I want to talk about, the change in consciousness, right? So this all came from that. So this is the whole purpose of the video. I went for a walk. It's flooded in our pasture. And I was meditating this morning. My wife was up earlier. She brought the dogs outside. And Tulsi killed a squirrel. And my wife was yelling, no. I worried a coyote was out there, so I jumped up and, kind of fucked up my meditation, the whole thing. And, there was 2 squirrels, and Tulsi killed one of them. And they chase squirrels all the time, and they don't even come close, right? And my wife was thinking maybe it was a baby squirrel or smaller squirrel. We have these little red squirrels that beat the shit out of these bigger gray squirrels. The gray squirrels have a little bit of red in them. The squirrels are interesting. We both are into squirrels. I was at the Grand Canyon. I saw this jet black squirrel with this fluffy white tail. I was walking by the campgrounds. My kids and I were camping out there. And, it's a thing. So, my wife was upset about it. She was thinking that these 2 squirrels were hanging out. Squirrels are pretty vicious with each other. Their mating ritual is not consensual. They're just, they're always chasing each other. These little squirrels are always chasing the bigger squirrels here, and the big squirrels are fighting for territory. And it wasn't a baby because, they don't have babies this early in the spring. And this was, I went and found the squirrel. So I go outside, and Tulsi had buried the squirrel, but its tail was sticking out. So I had gloves on, so I pulled it out to look at it, and she's burying it again, I think, now. And then I went for a walk in our flooded pasture because, these things are very draining, talking about things in the past, especially heavy, dense shit like this, the stuff that I've moved past myself. But it came back up, and partly because I'm watching this show called The Leftovers. And I started watching this show, and it seemed like a drama. I don't like dramatic shows. And again, I have these shows I watch when my wife sleeps, when we're watching something together. So I'm either watching, like I said, sports or something. And I started watching the show The Leftovers, and the first episode I almost did make it through. But it kind of got better, and I'm not sure how I feel about this show. I'm about 7 or 8 episodes into it. And it's about how there was a Revelations like event. I forget what they call the specific part of the Revelations, where all these good souls ascend to heaven. So the show starts off, there's a woman, and she's with her toddler. And she puts the toddler into a car seat. She's in a grocery store. And, it's a kind of a newborn baby. It's like a year-old baby. And she turns around, she gets in the car, and it's gone. And she freaks out, and she's running around looking for it. And there's a kid outside looking for his dad. And then a couple of cars collide, which comes back into the show later on, which is kind of neat the way they did it. Because the person who was driving is gone, right? And so all these people disappear. It's like, a small percentage of the population, but it's millions. And most people have somebody who just disappeared, and everything's fucked up afterwards. Like, people are fucked up. But these people, in the biblical book of Revelations, it's supposed to be the good people leave. There's a trumpet that blows, and the good people go to heaven. I was well aware, because I read the book of Revelations a couple of times when I was a kid, because I was into it. And, and it comes up from time to time, the end days things. And all the people who are left here are left in this hellscape, and everything sucks, right? And so, it's kind of interesting, because the people themselves who got beamed up to heaven, or whatever happened to them, again, disappear. And that doesn't happen. Physical bodies just don't disappear, right? That's, your soul would leave, and your body would just drop. Like, that's the way God does it. That's God's system. You leave your body. Your soul leaves your body. But, these whole bodies disappear. Anyway, a lot of these people were scumbags. They were horrible people. And they weren't like, the better people. And there's a reverend going around trying to convince people of that. And people are always beating the shit out of him because he's talking shit about their loved ones, right, who have disappeared. And so, there's kind of good things about the show. But the one thing I want to talk about here is there's a number of people whose consciousness changed, and they knew this was coming. And after it happened, they know things that other people don't know, and they're considered crazy. You know, there's all these people. There's a sheriff who's the main character, and his dad went crazy, and he's having these issues, like he's going over to the site of things, but his dad was a former sheriff, and he went crazy. And then there's these other people, other characters in the show, who knew it was coming, who sensed it, and they kind of know a little bit more of what's going on. Like they don't know why it happened or where the people went, but they understand that this is, there's something else going on here. And they talk a lot about being like woken up. And, I want to talk about that because that came up. I was thinking about this, it came up with this story I just told you. And when I realized that this guy was influenced by peer pressure by other people shitting on me, that's the reason he chose my ex over, whatever. Like somebody who's in a similar situation with him, who sees that there's fucked up things going on with the Heartfulness organization. But all these people, and I know a number of them, like the guy who came to me was a doctor who got ostracized for doing real science when he exposed Dodgy's bullshit Brighter Mind scam thing. Those of you who don't know about it, Dodgy has done a lot of scams. He's got involved with shady people. His son was, there's this indictment from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, for, him defrauding investors of $180 million and absconding with the money to India. There's this, this document out there about Dodgy's son, like just a bunch of bullshit, scummy things, right? And the evidence is overwhelming. And I realized, I was out there. I made a couple of videos exposing all this shit. And none of these people reached out to me or, talked to me or, did anything. One guy did. But other than that, the rest of them, they know what's going on. And so I took all the videos down. I got some copyright strikes from Heartfulness. And I was like, these motherfuckers know as much as I do or should. Because Dodgy's obviously, for one, he's shitting on his master, which for the Indian people is a fucking taboo and a no-no. And they're all in denial about that, but they know what's going on. There's one guy who did reach out to me, said that he talked to one preceptor. He said a bunch of people are meditating on the former master Chargy's form because they know that the fucked up things are happening, but they won't quit and they won't address it. But at least those people are not in as much denial about it, right? And so, my ability to shift consciousness and see, through the, whatever's going on because of doing the truther stuff and because of being ostracized, it was made very easy because I had these interactions with Dodgy where, I saw things that they didn't see about him becoming the master. I had a couple, experiences where, he offered me popcorn in the airport, and I looked at him and I realized he was in the central region. This is probably about 8 years before he was nominated to be Chargy's successor. And I was there when Chargy was passing away and Dodgy was becoming the master. Kamlesh was, right? So I saw that he was given the legitimate spiritual work and had the capacity to do this job. But he just fucked it, right? But then I was able to see on the other side how bad the fucking job he's done and how ingratitude and breaking the connection with his former master who had done so much for him and all the other things that went with it, he fucked the whole thing up, right? And whatever went on inside of him, and I kind of understand some of it, it didn't, it was an epic failure, right? And all these people, who may be better at this than I am or nicer people or whatever way that you could describe them as being better than me, they failed this test. Whatever it is, you call it a test or whatever, because they should be able to see what I see, but they refuse to see it. They're just not strong enough, right? And so whatever flaws I have or whatever things that I have going on, to me, they disgust me in the sense that, I understand denial, but we all are disgusted by sheeple. And I don't care if they leave the Heartfulness or they denounce Dodgy, but at least admit what's going on. Like, that's the thing. Admit that he's shitting on Chargy and he's doing things that are unspiritual and criminal, and the energy isn't the same. Because there are lots of people that see this and know it, and the rest of these people are just willfully denying it, and they suck. And they're lurking. They're not coming out. They're hiding in their little fucking whatever it is. And, these people claim to love Chargy. Like, they would weep when Chargy would leave their presence, and they would, they just profess their love for the guy. I've always struggled with the idea of a master and these things, and coming from the West, and I have issues with authority. Not that it's authoritarian type situation. And, Chargy always had these people around him. I wasn't always comfortable being with them and, these people and whatever. It was, sometimes it was disconcerting. The guy had this presence, right? And sometimes it was intimidating or whatever. And, I've had my own issues with all these things. But I'm eternally grateful for all he did for me. And, I would never disparage, somebody who had just a life of service. He served God in the highest possible way. And we all benefited from it. And so it's a remarkable accomplishment. And for Dodgy to come in and disparage that, like he's a fucking worthless piece of shit, and all these people who claim to love Chargy and are now bowing before Dodgy and licking his fucking boots or whatever it is. It's icky. Like, it's fucking icky. So going back to this change of consciousness thing, right? And so when you're a baby, you have a certain level of perception. Your brain isn't developed. You have this mind. You have these subtle bodies, right? The manas, the mind, and shit, consciousness. These are Sanskrit words. But there's these, 4 subtle bodies. There's these 4 major subtle bodies. And the main one is the causal body, which is the soul. And that creates these other fields: chit, consciousness, Buddha, intellect, and manas, mind. There's also the ego and these other ones, right? So there's quite a number of these things. But as a child, your physical capacity is only as much as, it can be in terms of your mind and your intellect. You have to have these experiences, and all these things have to develop your internal world, right? And so, when you're a baby, your way of seeing the world is so much different than it is as an adult that you're not going to have any memories as a baby, right? Like, very few people have any memories as being a baby. Like, young kids, sometimes they'll remember their birth. You'll talk to toddlers. One of my kids was talking about his birth, like remembering it, right? So there's a whole it was interesting interpretation of these events, like remembering this event, like as a baby, as a toddler, using his toddler intellect, having memories as a baby. But then as a toddler, you lose your memories when you become a kid. You have very few memories of your life as a baby or a toddler. And as you get older, your brain is purging some of these things. That's how they say it. It's pruning your synapses, and there's this brain shift that happens when you're 7, between being 7 and 8 years old. And then you become like a kid until you're a pre-adolescent, adolescent, and then an adult. And you're going through different levels of consciousness. And if you're living the right way, because some people stop developing their level of consciousness and they never turn into an adult, but if you're living the right way, your perception of the world changes. And that's where wisdom comes in, right? You become wise, and your body's falling apart, and you're now starting to go into the etheric world. And then there's other levels of consciousness where people become psychic, become mediums, become prophetic, right? And you have these levels where your consciousness raises to a higher level. Some sort of ability kicks in, like when you're a parent, right? When you become a parent, for moms, it's biological. It's biological. It's biological for dads, maybe to some extent, but of course they don't carry the baby. But there's just some kind of shift that happens when you go from being a non-parent to being a parent. Whatever happens inside of you, there's changes that you go through. You have to see the world in a different way. It happens in nature with animals. Like, it's your whole different level of consciousness is opened up to you because now you have young to take care of, right? And so, I realized that when I was, there's been profound, I don't want to say growth, but just changes that have happened from the 7-day sitting thing. I've been doing it as a preceptor and then taking the sittings. And I've noticed this shift. And, when I had this memory and I couldn't remember, like I had to piece the memory together, and I was sort of in a meditative state, whereas, I don't even care about this stuff anymore. I don't think about it, because it's run its course, right? I've disconnected myself from the, Dodgy, and I don't have any contact with any Abhyasis except for this guy, the Dodgy truther, who sends me stuff every once in a while. And I look at it, without, I'm not going to turn into a video. Occasionally I'll mention it in a journey series, but I'm just over it and I've moved on. But then when I realized a couple of things, the first thing was, this guy, he was trending towards, or tending towards being maybe a little bit of a truther, and he could see the merit of what I was doing, right? He saw the value, and he wasn't necessarily a fan of what I did, but he saw a benefit of it, right? And he saw the mission stuff, and he heard whatever story he heard from my ex, which it's very little truth in that story, because the difference between me and my ex is, I mean, aside from her psychological issues and all these things, and she went to an Ivy League school and grew up. Her dad was a CEO of a company, and they had a different. She was with a whole different level of people. She was like the number one student. She was the eldest in her family. Totally different dynamics, right? She grew up. She was 5.5 years older than me. She was a boomer, right? She was tail end of the boomers. Different in every possible way, right? Totally different life experiences, different kind of people. I mean, people that really had very little in common in terms of who we are and how we related to the world. But the big thing was that she never embraced these teachings that everything comes from God, that especially when you start Sajmark's system, everything's happening from God. And there's no victims. There's no victims. Everything is just, everything is fair, and everything happens for your spiritual evolution. And she had the opposite. Like, she was a victim, it was unfair, God got it wrong. I mean, she didn't think about it that way. But people were doing things and she didn't deserve them, and and making this up and really digging that role. The other thing is she loved the victim role. She loved being the victim. She used it all the time, that quote that I read. And for me, as unfair as it would seem, because nothing in this life made me deserve what I went through with her and the family, and how this all turned out, and brutal disappointment. And there was teachings I embraced that were Sajmark teachings that didn't pan out for my kids, and having no real relationship with my kids now, and I mean making my family like everything, and in terms of my material life, and this intergenerational family farm, and all these things that were goals that were never achievable, because when you're working with somebody with mental issues and mental health issues who sabotage and everything, right? And so, he heard my story, and he has heard enough of my videos to understand that at least I'm an honest person, and I believe in all these things, the Sajmark system. And for him to cave to whatever peer pressure or bullshit things that were happening, it was like fucked up. And I never thought about it that way. Like, I just thought, it's fucked up that he called her after hearing about my daughter, and he barely knew her, and all these other things, and it was kind of cutting me off for whatever reason. But when I was meditating last night, I just saw the thing in a different light, and I remembered my ex went to every person that I was connected with, and people that I was going to connect with. So there's these two preceptors who I knew better. This one guy, Mr. and Mrs. C. Mr. C was like just the nicest guy. And now he would be my preceptor. And my now new wife and my kids, my new wife started with him, my wife now. And, my two kids. And so I went over there and I found out they were spying on me. And they used Facebook, and my ex went and contacted, people in my wife's life. I mean, crazy shit. Like, I found out this later. My ex was going to everybody and trying to sabotage everything in my life. There was this nice German girl. She was from Austria. And she was one of the first people. She was like, in her 20s. And she became a member of our family. Just a sweet girl. And she, was listening to what I had to say. I had all these things that I say now to all of you, but there was no audience for me. My YouTube channel hadn't taken off. And I was hoping there would be people in the mission, and especially younger people, that I could impart some of these, things that I had learned, all this stuff that I talk about all the time. And there were a few young people in India that were like, truther type people. And she was the first one. I told her about Sepp Holzer because she lived in Austria. And it was, nice to have some people that, were resonating with this stuff I had to offer, right? Of course, Staji was sabotaging me even back then as well, right? And, I hadn't talked to this girl in years. She left India, and I wasn't in touch with her. But a few German people came, young German people who wanted to start the system. And so I contacted her, And she let me know my ex had communicated with her, which was fucked up because she reached out to her specifically to shit on me. And I didn't have that many people, I don't have anybody I'm close with. And I don't interact with that many people. I don't stay in touch with people. And she went to pretty much everybody that was in my life or whoever she could and said all these things about me. And yet I was the one who was in India dealing with my kids in this, this horrible situation that we were put in, and the whole thing, it was a lot of it had to do with her, her being completely fucked up and all these things. And had to get the kids back to America and rebuild our lives and all this shit, where she just, went off her medication and checked out of life. And, all the things that she did. And, for people to embrace that, I mean, for that piece of shit Dodgy to embrace it, but any of these other people, without even questioning, like knowing that she was, she had told everybody that she was, sexually abused. I mean, the mission, like her story is pretty well known. And she's shown signs of being fucked up, and she had a divorce, within the mission itself and her previous husband. And so there's lots of evidence to show she's unstable, right? And I was in a bad situation with my kids coming back to America, and to have Dodgy like diss me that way and be such a little bitch. I mean, that's the only other thing I could describe him as, just walking by me like a little bitch would do without acknowledging me, any of these things, not like a man, like a little bitch, right? And all these people there, they were like looking at me. My daughter was cutting herself. She cut herself on the way home from the gathering. So, I was going through a lot with my kids, and, my kids were future Abiasis, and even if they thought I was the piece of shit that my ex was describing to them, you would think they would say, well, it would be good to reach out and support this guy because he's alone with these kids, and if he's like a horrible person or, incompetent, whatever things she's saying, I would have needed help, right? The kids would have needed help. But to just isolate me and just all these things. So, all those people just suck. Like, it's just whatever good things that were in the mission, there's plenty of good things, and there's things I'm grateful for in terms of all the services and the ashrams that were built. A lot of great work was done by many of these people. But, this experience of them filling this thing with Dodgy and all these things. But this is the main thing I want to say about that. So going back to this TV show, and, the TV show's kind of good. Like, there's flaws in it. Like, there's a woman who lost her husband and 2 kids. And she's a prominent character in the show. And she goes to the store and buys them breakfast cereals that she doesn't eat. And it's like Fruit Loops and shitty stuff. And she's got all this shitty food, like stuff, processed foods that she was feeding to her kids. And then they have an episode later on, and it's been 3 years since the day everyone disappeared. It flashed back to that day, and she's with her family. And she goes to an interview to work as a political consultant. And the woman says, well, why, the woman running for mayor says, why do you want to do that? And she says, well, I wanted to do more than go to the grocery store and read labels to see which is the organic juice box. And I'm like, wait, you're giving your kids organic juice and Fruit Loops? It's like inconsistent, things like that. And those things always kind of bug me. But this idea that there's this epic change, and it isn't that the people disappeared, it's that something is afoot, right? And, this is what I'm talking about with Pockets of Future and all these things. And as much as my consciousness has changed over the years from doing the meditation and from stepping into various roles, my consciousness shifted from doing this job that I do here and other things, right? As much as I've had those consciousness shifts, I fully understand that the people who are meant for this thing, there's a lot of people who are just dead man walking. They're dead people. They're zombies, they're ghouls, there's nothing in them that's, their soul isn't going to be allowed back when there's massive population reduction. They have no role to play in whatever's going to happen. They're just NPCs walking around bumping into shit. And, I don't give a shit about those people because they're all checked out, right? They're not even people anymore. They have no ability to change. And then there's the people who do, who have this consciousness awakening in them, but most of them are resisting it, like the sheriff character in the show. There's a waking up process that's happening, but they're pushing it away. And they don't want to deal with what's about to happen. They're just, and they can. they're not NPCs, and yet they're unwilling to go there because going there will make them, very much different from everybody else, and maybe very much different from the people in their lives, and they're going to feel lonely and they're going to feel disconnected. There's times in life where you have a consciousness shift and you can't do the bullshit you've been doing. There's a lot of things you're doing that you're just checking the box and working a shit job that's sucking the life out of you, and you're in bogus relationships that aren't working, but you just, you're scared to do anything else, and you're too worn out, and you're too deprived, you're bankrupt of chronic love energy, like all these things. And, you can't move forward because you're scared, but where you are is like unbearable. But you have this consciousness shift, and you're like, I just can't do this anymore. Lology, the first master of the Sajmark system, there's this great story. He's like 7 or 8 years old, like 7.5 years old, 8 years old. And he's playing with his friends. And he has an awakening where, he's like, yeah, I'm not supposed to be doing this. Like he now has been activated. That he's supposed to be a spiritual, master. And he has to work on it. And he starts evolving spiritually from that moment. And in a short period of time, he reaches the goal of human life. It's like some kind of epic consciousness change and shift. He went from being a little kid doing little kid things to being a spiritual giant. And that's probably the most profound example of something like this. But there are going to have to be people waking up to seeing what's going on and not engage with all the political bullshit, all the, binary stuff, the left-right paradigm stuff and all these things. Because it just has to happen, right? It just has to, if it isn't, then humanity's wiped out. Because the NPCs are done and the evil people are done who are running things. So there has to be another group of people who are accepting what's happening, even grateful for it, and willing to go through the changes and adapt to, rising to a higher level of consciousness, because that's what's being asked of the human race right now. All right, so let me wrap this one up here, and I'll continue on. I have this, this is one more voiceover to put in the Journey series tomorrow, and I can wrap up that Journey series. This is also going to be a part of a standalone video, which will have that audio. It'll have 3 audios in it that's going up on the Gratefullness Meditation channel. And I'll put this at the end of the video for Pockets of the Future, my regular, stuff I'm doing today.